Welcome to the Five Phenomenon Podcast. I am your host, Shane Hazen. Coming up on this episode, we got editor Jamie Kirkpatrick, whose new film, Old Henry, has just been released in theaters. But also joining me, Ted.
Yes, I'm back.
Ted!
After a long spell.
It's always a long spell.
So hopefully you fans out there are ready to hear me babble again. Well, actually, not as much. You guys, you two editors get together. You guys
Shop talk.
Yeah, there's a lot of shop talk.
A lot of shop talk.
It's good. It's fascinating shop talk.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting. So I didn't get much word in edgewise.
You got to it. It snatched victory from the jaws of defeat.
My friends would be so proud.
But first off, what did you watch this week, Dad?
Well,
can we talk about the one we watched together? Because that's one of my big ones.
Well, let me just mention. I'll rattle them off, and then we'll get back to that.
Okay.
The one we watched together was Venom, and then I saw the original Frankenstein, the original director, back to back yesterday, and then I saw The Eyes of Tammy Faye last night in the theater.
Which I'm curious to see that.
And then of course we're going to talk about Open Range, so I did watch that too. So.
Yeah, and we also okay, the one we watched two movies together this week, but the one.
What was the other one?
The subject of this episode, Old Henry.
Oh yeah, well yeah, of course, obviously,
Old
yeah,
Henry.
and okay.
I watched The Many Saints of Newark, the Sopranos prequel.
At home.
I watched it at home.
Okay.
I watched it with my friend Ryan Mullen, who is an expert.
So how was it?
I'm still trying to process it. I think it was really good.
If you haven't watched all the Sopranos, can you still enjoy it?
I think so. Here's the ways I'm trying to figure it out, because all the things I liked most about it were the references and the way it recontextualized the original episode, because there's all these stories they've told about on the show, and the majority of the stories you find out, you get to see how they really happen, and you find out that they're bullshit.
And I guess, in a weird sense, technically, if you're not haven't seen The Sopranos,
you're seeing the first one.
This is a prequel, so you can technically, I guess you can watch it, but I'm sure darn well retroactively there's things put in there for the fans that are fans, to really get a extra uber text.
The part I'm having trouble figuring out is if you go back to our episode on David Chase, Not Fade Away, which is a great movie,
but he didn't direct this though.
He didn't direct this, and that's the thing, is like there's a certain David Chase. If you listen to these podcasts he's doing right now, when he came out, like he really wanted to be a director, and he got stuck in TV. And by the time he got to Sopranos, he's writing some really idiosyncratic stuff, and some with soul and a lot of depth. And he should have been a director, but he only directed the pilot and the final episode of Sopranos and Not Fade Away. And he didn't direct this. And
why?
It sounds like there's health issues in the family, it's not. It was, and also. So there's not that there's a certain level of weirdness, but also like life is real when it's its most bland feeling that sometimes in Chase style that is, I can't tell if it's there in the movie or not. One of the weirdest things I'm finding no one talk about is the movie is not 100% stylistically of a piece with the show. Like there's an extreme color palette in the movie that's not in the show at all, and the show was gorgeous looking, so it's a choice. And they got is it Alan Taylor directed it? It came over from the show. He directed some episodes of the show, so it was a choice.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try to get it in. I've only seen one season of The Sopranos, so I've kind of forgotten it. That's on my bucket list.
But the movie we watched together, we had to drag you to watch Venom.
Well, yeah, I almost did. It was a screening too, and I almost didn't. I almost bypassed it, but yeah. But okay, all I'm going to say is, remember my first reaction was, it's a cupcake. It's a Hostess cupcake, processed cupcake.
A lot of people I talked to said, like, did you see the first one? Then you should know what you're getting into.
And we're talking about Venom here, folks.
And then the sequel, Let There Be Carnage, which it really is one of our best actors suddenly jumping into this teen male like icon of, and we were talking about Venom and Carnage afterwards, the comic stuff, and it really hit me, like, even when you and Aaron Smith and I were all talking about this afterwards, I immediately defaulted to the normal, oh, well, I came of age when Image was going up, and there's an artist company that had no depth or substance to it, and all that, and like automatically deferential to the comics I liked as a kid. But there's a part of me that wants to, like, like some modern comic artists like Jonathan Hickman has come out and said like, Rob Liefeld had a power to him. Tom McFarlane at his day had a power to him, and like I shouldn't short sell it.
No, I mean when they were at Marvel and DC before Image was formed, I noticed it.
And part of their popularity now is that everyone, when Spawn came out in particular, everyone gave McFarlane shit because it's like, it seems like a pretty reductive, like, what are your two popular characters you draw on? Batman and Spider-Man. How's the easiest way to design them? And also have chains that defy gravity involved with them. But I mean, clearly the reason he's become popular in the years, he's a design genius. Like, and some of these, I'm getting no reaction from you on that.
Well, I mean, we're going down a major rabbit hole here.
The one thing I want to say that I realized after seeing the movie was, and it was the one big problem I had with the movie, is that we start talking about, one of the things whenever you watch a credited comic book movie, your favorite part, or the part you always kind of like point out and light up at, is the special things where they name the creators. And you find out it's whether they're not going to get paid for any of this stuff, although supposedly the lawsuits and the works might change that. But there's like, they're going to actually acknowledge it. And so it said Venom created by David Michelin and Todd McFarlane, and Carnage created by David Michelin and Mark Bagley. Mark Bagley was my artist. To this day, I love him. And I started realizing after the fact, the movie designs Carnage as just like, there's a joke even in there where it's like, it's red Venom. But Carnage, the way Mark Bagley designed him, is way more interesting and cool. He was much more lithe and kind of small, but he had these tendrils, so he looked like a snake, a mixture between a snake and blood, constantly writhing blood. Because
they do that in the movie,
kind of.
It's there.
He looks more muscular to me.
Well, the body, yeah, but there's a lot of the tendrils are there.
There are.
Yeah.
I guess. I'm not 100% like the design on these movies are kind of poop.
Yeah, they're just I don't know. It's
I think you come just because the funniest thing about the movie is the internal dialogue between Venom and Eddie Brock, and like that's where like Tom Hardy, like who was had a co-story credit on this movie with Carrie Marcel.
Yeah, I remember watching the it continues in the second one, but watching the first one, I'm like, boy, this is a really strange performance by Tom Hardy.
Yeah.
And I get my own little weird theories, and I adore Tom Hardy, the Locke and Inception and just Bronson, all that stuff. But to see him in this, I'm like, ugh. And I'm like, okay, but now I'm thinking, he's having fun.
Yeah, he's having fun.
I mean, I hate that stigma, comic books are kids or juvenile or whatever you want to call it, the whole stigma that still seems from ever since Batman 66 came out.
And to be fair, I need to be very bluntly clear. These two movies are abundantly dumb movies.
Yeah, and he's having fun. He goes, I'm going to have fun with this, and I'm going to do a little bit of a kooky spin he's stretching some muscles that you don't normally see with him in this movie, I think, in terms of performance. So that's kind of interesting, I think. But even though I kind of be baffled at first.
And to a certain extent, still baffled. But the other movie we watched together, we just finished today right before we recorded our episode, was Old Henry, which I didn't know what to expect. I really liked it.
Yeah, no, it was very, very. I think Western fans are going to love it, and there's some really interesting story points, and it gets the Western look, down pat.
What was so funny was you were talking for like the first, I want to say. There's a plot point in around 20 minutes or 30 minutes in, and it was that point in the movie where you're not sure like what kind of movie we're watching, if it's going to be a quality level, and like you would point out like a certain story choice, and you're like, oh, this is a trope. You didn't say the word trope, but you almost used the word trope.
But there was one thing I did make. I was interesting. I was like, God, this part of the story. I'm like, why? It's just. But it paid off.
My point was whenever I was just kind of quiet because I was like, I think this movie's going to be good, and I want to see how it unfolds. And sure enough,
it's on purpose. It's on purpose, folks.
Oh, there was so much. There was a very lean, and as we get into the interview with Jamie, like it's also a very informed Western towards other Western. And half this episode, I should also mention, even though it comes in and out, is technically about Kevin Costner's Western movies and The Postman, and in particular his movie Open Range.
Yeah, we were supposed to. I think we got more off track on the
shop talk.
Yeah, but that's expected. But maybe we'll revisit Costner down the road at some point. I'm sure we will.
Yeah, because I watched all three of them, and they are.
He only directed
He
3 films,
only directed 3 films,
which is weird because you think he's done more than that.
and for someone that opened up with an Oscar winner and some pretty big celebration for his potential career.
I kind of miss. I guess I think a lot of times I kind of mix in the Kevin Reynolds films because they're good friends.
I think that's a good.
And Costner has a very tight control over Kevin, and when he directs, and he's
collaboration. Doesn't that mean not control? Collaboration.
No, that's right. Collaboration.
All right.
Yeah, because I don't want Kevin Costner mad at me.
Anyway, here's Jamie Kirkpatrick. We're talking Old Henry and Old Range, or Old Range, Open Range, Open Range. Old Henry was posting out of Nashville, or were you guys were doing it entirely remote?
Well, both, right? So I was the only person not in Nashville. The not only was the crew there, but this company that produced this film and is going to produce some others, and we can get into that later. Hideout Pictures is all based in Nashville,
Okay.
and they produce a lot of stuff for like CMT, Country Music Television.
When I was doing my IMDb dive, it seemed like there was a lot of overlap, and then you had Trace Atkins, obviously, in this.
Yeah. I mean, and so but I was hired on. I mean, Potsy was looking for an ed. I mean, I can't speak to the process. I wasn't privy to it, but it was clear that they wanted like an editor. I mean, I wasn't about to say a real editor. That sounds horrible. I don't mean that, but whatever. They wanted somebody who had like feature film experience, and so they found me and they were like, well, especially in COVID, like we're totally fine doing this remote. Their one stipulation was that we need you to cut in Premiere because our whole shop is Premiere based or Adobe based, I should say.
How was that?
And so it was fine is the answer. Totally
okay.
Fine.
Okay.
And at first I was kind of like, okay. And I knew I could cut fine in Premiere. I've done other shows on it, but I was just kind of like, well, my only hesitation is kind of like not being super familiar with like how to turn over and things like that. And feeling like I'd been kind of heard through the grapevine that could have been problematic and whatever. So because of that, I basically told him like, can you give me 48 hours before I tell you definitively that this is okay? Because he kind of said like, look, if you feel like if it's a deal breaker, we can talk about the Avid, and I was like, I don't think it's a deal breaker, but give me a couple of days. So I did like a deep dive into like researching Premiere on features and asked a lot of friends. And interestingly, there were certainly some people who were like, no, run, don't do it. Like blah, blah,
right.
blah, blah, blah. But then I also had like a decent sized contingent of people going, hey, like, I have a friend who's working with Fincher, and like Fincher's done his last like 3 things on Premiere, and like it works fine.
So I've been working on Premiere lately, and I was complaining to somebody about it, and someone then turned around just like, don't listen to what David Fincher says because he's not an assistant editor. He doesn't have to deal with any of that.
Well, that's true, but believe it or not, I moderated the Editors Guild panel for Mank when it came out.
Okay.
And so I got to know Ben. I'm going to blank on Ben's name right now, but he's the first assistant editor on Mank, and he also did like Mindhunter.
Okay.
And I mean, he's also like he's more, I don't mean this in any sort of negative way. He's more of like an engineer than he is like an assistant. Like he's a genius.
Well, Fincher's AEs always strike me as amazing. Like I've always heard there's through the grapevine, like his stabilization process is really involved and awesome.
I mean, doing that panel, I mean, that was the first time I really understood the level, the granularity of his filmmaking. I had always kind of heard about it, but when especially Ben and when they described it, you're like, oh yeah. I mean, he said like 93% of all the shots in the movie have been affected. Like there is some digital difference. Like they are not camera originals. Like he's like maybe
beyond just your normal digital intermediate stuff.
Yeah. And he goes, and sometimes it might just be simple, like just like we want the, the angle just tweaked a bit or whatever. But he's like, but a lot of times it's like full on frame stitching,
Wow.
digital manipulation. So anyway, I had already done that panel. And so like I I specifically started searching stuff that they had talked about, and obviously, like their post team had done a lot of press about Mank in like the Academy, like campaign and all of that stuff, because obviously they were up for an editing Oscar. So I was able to find a lot of stuff about it, and just through that, I was like, okay, like this is doable. So they, when I was making the deal, they were like, so do you want your own assistant? Blah blah blah, and I did. Generally, I do. I have a couple of people that I generally work with very closely, but they did say they're like, we do have a guy down here who like has worked with us and like knows our workflow in terms of our shop and like technically, and he'd like to do it. And it was one of those cases where I was like, all right. And my regular assistant was not available right then, so I thought, okay, I think I need to be like just smart rather than loyal about this one, and
Okay.
knowing that like I can edit in Premiere, but that's kind of about as far as I like get. So we brought him on, and he was kind of a godsend. Like he really did know it. And the one thing was, because of everything I had heard from like the Fincher people, I knew that this new thing had just come out, like only, gosh, probably like 6 months earlier, called Productions, which essentially is Adobe's answer to shared projects, which was always the problem with Premiere, in my opinion. Before, I'm like, as an editor, it works fine, but I can't easily share my project with anybody. I won't get into why. Anyone who's used Premiere and tried to do that will know why. It's like it was just so.
My last project, the group project thing, was the nightmare part.
Well, but were you using Productions or no?
I don't know if it was a product. I don't think so, because it was really odd, because I was using a remote software where I was going through somebody else's computer,
Yeah,
and
me too.
one of the error. Did you do this entire movie on the remote software?
Yeah, well, almost. I'll get.
How fast was it?
It had its moments, but this place in Nashville, I guess, had did that a lot. So they were like, "Here's how we're doing it," and I mean, we just were using like Splashtop, which is like third party software. It wasn't like they had some proprietary thing, but they had used it enough before that they knew how it worked. And I will say, just to quickly jump ahead, like at the end, after the director had already seen an initial cut, and then we were really mostly doing notes, I did, and they had finished shooting. I was like, you have to send me a media drive. Like before, we couldn't because they were doing all the dailies there. And
Right,
so it
right,
didn't make
sure.
sense to do like a shuttle thing. So, but once everything was done, I was like, I need everything cloned onto a media drive, and you got to send it to me. And if I need to remote in so that you guys can see something, that's fine. But when I'm working by myself, like I just need to. And once I plugged the media drive in and started working that way, I just remember being like, oh God, like this is what I've been missing. And I didn't. It's like when you put reading glasses on for the first time and you realize,
Yeah.
like, oh, I've been going blind for like 2 years, like, and I didn't
It's
know.
so frustrating how slow you get when you're doing remote, and
Yeah.
you think, it's like, am I sucking right now? Am I not getting anything? Like,
Yeah. I knew, for me, it was more of like, I knew like, because again, listen, it's an action film basically. So it's like, you know, the specificity of the edit points are real important. It's like,
right,
is the squib hitting on the fourth frame or the third frame or whatever? And like,
right.
normally I can do that more. I prefer to do that more by feel, right? I play it through, and it's kind of the merch technique of like, am I hitting stop at the same spot every time? And if I am, I know
Mm,
that's definitely where it
yeah,
should
yeah,
be.
yeah.
You can't do that in a remote setup, because it's like it's never stopping where you think it's going to stop. It's always a few frames later. Once I got the media drive, I literally went, once I realized that had happened, I was like, okay, so I remember calling and being like, I need half a day to be left alone, because I think I lied and was like, I found a little technical glitch, I can fix it, but you got to just leave me alone for. And they were like, yeah, no problem. When in fact what I was doing was I just went through the entire film, just cut by cut, realizing like, nope, that's off a couple of frames, and I tweaked the entire movie, like, you know, I don't want.
No, no, I know exactly
Yeah,
what you're talking about. Did you get a reaction?
they didn't. I never heard anyone ever noticed. If they did, they didn't tell me,
Okay.
which is
It would have
fine.
been
Like,
nice if you got a reaction,
I
though.
know, I know. If they're like, oh, it's better. What did you do? Or like,
I mean, even you like that magician thing every once in a while when you do a certain thing and no one knows what you did, but they're just like, why does this feel better right now? And you worked your ass off for a completely invisible technique, and you're like, I don't
Yeah.
know. It's a mystery.
Yeah, yeah, totally. But so that but aside from that, I mean, there were, of course there's certain days where like, the internet's being wonky and so the connection's not working well. And I mean, I definitely had some frustrations, but there was no alternative. I'm like, well, I'm not going to Nashville and they're not asking me to go to Nashville. So it was like I just made the most of it and it was fine. And the production software, which is like it's basically like a new platform within Premiere that again allows you the best way to think of it is like where in Avid everything is project based and then within the
Okay.
project you can have folders and bins. In Premiere you have to think of it more of like projects in Premiere basically just become folders. So you can have multiple projects and the idea
Okay.
is like not only can we both be in the same project, but you don't have to be. So I had a cuts project and there was a separate dailies project. So my assistant could be working on the day's dailies totally separate from me while I'm cutting. And then he could go, hey man, I left you a bin. Those two scenes are ready. And I could go into the shared project, grab those two bins, open them up and start cutting with them. So it's basically just like Avid's worked for 25 years with like, if you're on a shared storage solution, but and it worked really, really well.
I hope so. Finishing up the story from earlier, I was working two versions back, and one of the errors was I updated the current version or the most recent current version. And they're like, all the work you did today, like the assistant editor had to go back in and like reformat it back to the old version and all.
Really?
Like,
Oh,
yeah, and then like, but it was my first experience with it on top of doing the jump desktop remote
yeah, yeah,
system.
yeah, yeah,
So I just and they're trying to figure this out for the first time too.
yeah.
So it was everything seemed fine-ish, but how long were you editing on Old Henry?
Not very long. It was literally one of my shortest uh projects, and I'm one of those people. I'm not great with dates. Like I once something's happened, I kind of forget. So it was the shoot was 21 days. Um,
Okay, this. I don't know if it just there's a certain amount of expertise in the movie that came across, but it felt like I just thought there's more shoot days than that because everyone wants to do 21 days now.
yeah, I mean, listen, I'm very not proud because I didn't have anything to do with this, but I mean, it's I am an evangelist for how they shot this movie. Not meaning this is how everyone should do it. I just mean it's like the fact that the film is doing so well and getting the kind of reviews it's getting. I like we at the time we were doing it, we all knew like we're doing this tiny little movie because it was by all accounts. Yes, yes, we had Tim Blake Nelson and Steven Dorff, and it's like, but they were doing a tiny little movie. They were working for a fraction of whatever they, I assume whatever they normally get paid and all of those things. But like the incredible thing about it was and this is the little backstory, like the entire expanse of the movie that you see, which presumably takes place when you watch the film over like a couple of counties in like Oklahoma, in the Oklahoma territory, right?
All right.
That's one private ranch outside of Nashville with several
Okay.
hundred acres. I don't know the exact number. I wasn't there, but like it's private property. So because of that, and the house that is Henry and Wyatt's house, that where a lot of the action takes place, was already there, but uninhabited. Like it was like an old like trail house or what I don't even know what you'd call it, but like and so they were able to pour whatever money they had like into like that house and making it look, and furnishing it and whatever and doing all this other stuff. Um, but it was like over that huge hill that you see, especially you see throughout the movie, but like especially at the end, like is the rancher's home. Like so if you crested that hill in real life, there'd like be a whole nother like house and barn and ranch there. But because of how it's hundreds of acres and it had like if you went to I'm making this up because I wasn't there, so I don't know the actual directions. But if you went just
Right.
like 1,000 yards to the east, you hit that little like river, like Babbling Brook section. that the guy kind of like sneaks through when he's like checking out the homestead, or like if you went over the other set of hills, you like see that amazing expanse where like the the one guy is like checking out the trail and saying like there was somebody here, but he's like, he covered his tracks really well. It's like it's all one property. And
I was trying to do the math of locations, but I think I was doing the math of buildings. So,
yeah,
and you're always dismissive of open, especially in westerns where half of it is the wide shots and the vistas.
right.
Like you're just like, well, it's scenery. You just got to find a place where there aren't buildings. So
And what's yeah, I mean it's amazing. And like, what's even cooler is given that this whole film was shot during COVID, pre-vaccine, by the way, like pre-vaccine.
this was January 2021 to March.
Uh
That's what Wikipedia had.
no, it's earlier. It would have been shot.
Wikipedia was wrong?
Yeah.
Shock.
It was shot November through December. I don't know the exact dates. I just realized I can't like remember.
Okay.
Anyway, but so pre-vaccine, but again, because it was like they were on private property, and it was I don't know the number. It was a very small crew, like 20 something, like really small.
Okay.
But you understand, like there's live animals and stunts and like all these gags. It usually takes like
Yeah.
teams of people on those crews. But they were able to like just kind of keep it as like this, almost like a theater rep group where it's just like it's the same little group of people, and they were testing all the time, and you know doing all the safety stuff. And so it was, at the time it was happening, I kept thinking like, gosh, these guys are really proving how, not only how you can shoot a movie during COVID, but how you can shoot the kind of movie that would seem impossible.
Right.
But it's also like most of it's outside, and so therefore much safer. It's like, the scenes that are inside are like not super complex and don't require a ton of crew to be in there. So it's really, I just, all the credit to Potsy, and his I mean, really, his DP John Matichek, is like, it's amazing what they pulled off. Like every day I was seeing dailies, I was like, oh my god. It's funny. I take a little bit of credit, or I'd like to take a little bit of credit in like being the first one to like say to them, because Potsy's very like modest. He's very modest.
Okay.
And I was the one like sending him text like 7 or 8 days in, going like, dude, this stuff is gorgeous. Like the dailies I'm getting are some of the most beautiful I've ever looked at. And oh, thanks, man. Yeah, like he's great. Matichek's amazing. He's great. It would be that sort of thing. And then like as the weeks kind of went on, and I was actually cutting scenes and being like, oh, this is gonna really work. Like this stuff cuts together like butter and blah blah blah. Then my texts were more like, do you guys understand like what you're making? Like, do you understand like you're making something that's more elevated than it was pitched to me? And that
Okay.
like even your producers like are like, I don't think they get it. I don't think they get, and like there was a joke they used to call it. They're like it's going to be a Walmart Western, meaning like we're going to like,
I know exactly what
straight
that term
to video.
is. Yeah, I know exactly what that means.
exactly right. And those, as they pointed out to me, those movies do super well. Like if you're a producer, that's a good business model, because if you've got Trace Adkins on your cover somewhere, and like whatever, just if your marketing is kind of smart, and kind of the entire like southern half of the country like loves that sort of stuff. And I'm not saying northerners don't, I just mean like that stuff like sells. It's just good popcorn entertainment. So you can absolutely like make your money back on a small movie like this like pretty quick with those sorts of deals. But this, like, probably like the third or fourth time I heard them say Walmart Western, I was like, guys, I'm so sorry, but I gotta stop you. Like, it's not that. You keep saying that, but I'm here to tell you it's not. Like, this is the sort of thing you should be thinking about entering, like in the on the festival circuit. And and they were like, "Oh, really?" And so like I was really pushing for that.
When did they start to really click? Like after the friends and family screenings, or when?
We never did that. Never had a friends and family screening.
You just got through saying how the efficiency in a COVID production works, so of course, obviously, that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah, I mean, it really was just going to like Potsy and the producers, the people at Hideout, and then eventually to the folks at Shout Studios.
Is that are they connected with Shout Factory?
Yep.
Okay.
Shout Factory is basically their like their merchandising arm, and then they also have a studio, which I don't know. I don't know if that's been around a really long time. I don't think it has, but
that was I don't.
I think they've got it in. I mean, I think it's been a recent thing where they're starting to get into doing their own features now and stuff.
Yeah. So, and I think that's one. Once they saw the cut, and I have a good friend who's who's involved with like the Woodstock Film Festival, and we were talking about a previous film I did that was gonna screen there, and she asked what I was doing, and I told her, and she's like, any chance I could like see is there a trailer? And I was like, let me check. I mean, yes, we had cut a teaser, but I was like, I can't just send it out. So I asked Potsy just to text like, hey, would you be cool? Like they're asking about it. Would you mind if I just sent it to her? And like, they're pros, they won't send it out. And he's like, yeah, sure. And it was like, I sent it out. And it was like that night, like I got an email from like the director of the festival being like, how do we contact this director? Like, we want this. And I was like, and then I knew, I was like, okay, like it wasn't just me being overly precious or proud about the project. Like other people are also seeing that this is better. This is not a Wal-Mart Western. This is better. So
it just seems like there's a lot more. I'm used to the stories where, since you're the last person in the process and you're the one to put together all the elements, finally, there's an exact opposite tendency there of like being the one to be like, you guys had high aspirations. Let's make it best as we can of it.
Before I'll interject with just a side about Walmart movies that I just noticed that Alex Cox movie went straight to Walmart.
You're kidding?
Yeah, it was some weird Western low budget thing. I haven't watched it yet.
Do you know what it's called? That's the kind
of. It's like a spaghetti Western. I can't remember off the bat. It's Kurosawa. He's doing.
Is this didn't he like make a Kurosawa script, one of the unmade Kurosawa scripts?
That was earlier on. I think this is. I can't think.
But somebody's been trying to make. There's like two or three new Kurosawa scripts.
Maybe it is, but I'm at Walmart one night, and all of a sudden there it is. Like I'm like Alex Cox, and it's a Western, and I'm like, okay, well this is strange. So anyway, I just had to throw that in.
I don't want to leave Old Henry behind, and we'll come back to this and go to your career. But originally, the idea, the format of this podcast has changed a few times to where like it's just more, even though we want to help people promote stuff, we want to talk about like just random movies more than anything else, and find an excuse for that. And before we get to the open range in Kevin Costner's filmography and other Westerns, you and I first off had this really bizarre email exchange where one of them disappeared after I asked you for a really long list of like, I asked you for a list of Westerns that, maybe not on everyone's.
Well, no, I think you said what are your favorite Westerns? And that's why that's why I sent it all broken out. Like,
I'm going to read what you sent me, and Ted, you can chime in on this, but it was a great list because a lot of times when I ask people like, come on, let's talk some movies no one talks about, I don't get good answers on this. But you started out with classics, and you suggested High Noon first, because it's all about editing. Right. Then you went to the Cowboys, which I have not seen.
Oh. What?
Yeah.
Are you looking to Ted for a comment?
I guess he's. I mean, I can interject on all of them.
Interject.
No, but I will.
This is a podcast. It's for commentary. People to have opinions.
I'm just waiting.
But let me I'm going to say one thing about the Cowboys, just because if you said you haven't seen it, I won't say too much. But
no, you said in the email, and I think I already knew because on one of my favorite movie podcasts is Movies That Made Me for the Trailers from Hell, and Josh Olson always talks about what happens at the end of that movie scarred him forever.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, I mean, no particularly big spoiler because it's well known, but it's like I think John Wayne only dies in like 2 movies he ever made. I think that's
Yeah.
like the
Okay.
thing I've heard, and The Cowboys is one of them. So, aside from that, what I was going to say is like, so there's, one of my favorite like character actors is this guy named Roscoe Lee Brown. He's an
Love him.
African American actor who was real big, like in the kind of late 60s, 70s, and even in
great voice. Has a wonderful voice.
yeah. And as a good friend of mine is going to love that I mentioned this publicly. Roscoe Lee Brown was the voice of Darth Vader in the LP. I don't even know what you'd call it, but when I was a kid, I mean, I'm a bit older than you, Shane, I'm certain, but there was a record you could buy. It was like the radio play of Star Wars. Like it was just actors like doing Star Wars, and there was sound effects, but it was not from the movie. It was just like kind of like a condensed radio play. And Roscoe Lee Brown, if I remember correctly, was Darth Vader. And for some, like I've always that's why I know who he is. Like he probably wouldn't have been on my radar otherwise, but like on the back of the LP, which in my day, like you'd sit there listening to things and just like pour over like the liner notes and stuff and look at all the little pictures. So I knew this guy's face. And then years later, when I first saw the Cowboys, probably like on TV, I was like, oh my God, that's the dude that plays Darth Vader. And then he ends up having one of like the great speeches in any Western. And I'm not going to give anything away, but specifically about him being black in that time. And it's like, when it happens, you're like, how in the hell did this make it into this movie? Because
who directed Cowboys?
Rydell.
Anyone who knows anything about John Wayne, it's like, I mean, the guy was like super conservative and like a traditionalist. Right. And then there's this like 3-minute progressive left-leaning speech that you're like, I can't believe, like, and it's amazing. It's like really what elevates the movie for me, of like not just being like this. It's an amazing moment. It's all over YouTube. People, it's like funny. I looked. It's like some of the YouTube clips of him doing the speech have like millions of views. Like, so I love. And he died maybe somewhere in the last decade. I can't remember when, but that was like a big thing when he died. They were like all the news show, spots were like showing him doing the speech. So.
Wow.
Mark Rydell. And I always, with Rydell, he's an overlooked director. He does really good work over the years.
What's the
Ongoing Pond is another one. And the Bette Midler movie with James Caan. It's World War II.
Well, I know Rydell from Long Goodbye, but
acting in it.
Yeah, because I remember,
a great part.
No, I'm curious because I remember I can't remember what movie I remember being underwhelmed by, but I that sounds amazing. I need to see. Left-Handed Gun is actually on TCM's watch TCM's app right now, so I watched part of it the other day. You said it's Arthur Penn's first movie,
which I didn't know. I had to look. I just remembered it, and that's another one like I actually haven't seen in a little while, but I remember being like, oh, that's a great. So I found that out kind of after the fact.
It's pretty fresh with me. I finally caught up to it because I'm a big Arthur Penn fan, and I thought the only thing that's interesting is Paul Newman. He is really working at it. He's okay.
You know what's weird is I watched last week rewatched East of Eden, and so James Dean was on my brain. And I mean, for some reason I watched Streetcar Named Desire recently, and I don't really know much Newman in the 50s beyond like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
Right.
And it really struck me that Arthur Penn would have been like a Broadway director or a New York director or for stage, right?
Yeah, method. And
so the method, the Elia Kazan feeling, the vibe onto it, like just affectation for affectation's sake in a 50s movie, like it's weird, but also like especially after watching it right after James Dean, I was thinking like it's a daddy issue thing or something. I don't know. It was just.
Did you say a daddy issue?
Yeah. That there was something about Newman before Newman, like we're starters watching Newman in black and white, like right. Suddenly you're like, well, that's one of his weapons taken away from him, his eyes, but or his blue eyes, I mean.
Yeah.
But it was It looked really interesting. The other funny thing was like that opening title credits. It's Alexander Courage who did the Star Trek theme. Did the music for it.
Oh, I did not realize that.
Yeah, no, those were the big takeaways I got from it, from what I saw. And then I'm loath to name this one just because I feel like it's going to hijack the whole podcast. But
no, we don't.
The Man with No Name trilogy.
Right.
Well, Leone's my god. That's why he says it. And probably a day doesn't go by when I mentioned Leone. That's why he's saying that. Yeah. I'm not going to even go there because I'll
limited him to.
I'll hijack the whole.
I limit him to one Leone reference per podcast.
Right. Well, and that's, I think on my thing, I said something like these just kind of go without saying. Like they're in the canon. It's like they've been so discussed. It just goes without saying that they should be on the list. So.
Yeah, and if I ask you Westerns, if you don't put it, then it seems like an omission.
But years ago they would not have been on the list.
Sure.
I'm 62 years old, and I was like 8 or 9, 10 years old when those things came out, and changed my world. Yeah. I mean, and probably one reason I'm a big cinema obsessive is because of Sergio. And here I'm hijacking it. All right, but anyway,
we brought it up.
I can remember those things were not on the radar and map critically, and it took a long time. And now, and especially with the final endorsement by Quentin, to Tarantino, now they're respected, so well.
And then we go to you had your end of era Westerns, and also another hijack title, The Wild Bunch.
Well, 1906 here with the Old Henry. I was like, oh, okay, this will be interesting. I was I was waiting to see if there was going to be some little more modern interjections in this film because it was 1906. The city talk about the boy going to the city, that was it was really interesting.
Yeah, there's that line. He goes like, "There's tractors that can do this work in half the time," or whatever.
Right.
But that's the little nod to like it's not the Old West anymore. It just isn't. They're living that life, but no one else is.
Yes, you're right.
I skipped one of your classics, The Shooting, which reason I kind of said we talked a little bit about that on our own Monty Hellman episode.
Yeah, we did a thing about Monty Hellman, talked about those. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, amazing.
But back to your end of era, then you did The Shootist, which the reason I went back is
the other John Wayne dying, and
confused those two titles too.
Speaking of Monty Hellman did in the Westerns. Have you seen any of the Bud Bedecker films?
It's funny you said that. I was just before we logged on, I was just going through some just to kind of get my brain working, 50 100 best films of all time, I mean Westerns of all time, just to kind of fire up my brain of what else is out there. And it's funny, I stumbled upon, I think it's the Independent, out of England, had to listen, and they mentioned his stuff specifically. And that's one of those where I know I've seen a few of those. But once I was reading this list, I'm like, oh, I'm going to need to find some time to go back and revisit these, because I don't remember them specifically as being so amazing, but it seems like they're held in very high regard. So
you'll be amazed by them, because the cachet on them has just grown and grown on those. And it's just the ones that Bedecker did with Randolph Scott.
Yeah,
and there's a nice box set out there. I think they're going to get ready to release it again. And Clint Eastwood and Tarantino and Taylor Hackford all show up, just
to talk about
over them.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say last month there was a Bedecker section on the Criterion Channel. They put up a bunch of this, so I think there's probably a new transfer that they did that's coming.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Bud Bedecker movies might strike you. There's a squareness to them that might initially throw you. It gives away. There's a lot of subversives going under.
Yeah, but I mean, when Sergio saw Bud Bedecker at a festival, Sergio belted out, Bud, I stole everything from you. So it's in the biography of Leone that he did that.
Oh, this is cool. Why you're limited to one per episode, because I've heard that story on here maybe 5 times.
I'm sorry, Shane.
No, I haven't. That's a great bit.
End of an Era, Blazing Saddles, which I thought was...
Which I just watched recently. My old Snapper case DVD. I mean, that's how old a copy I have of that thing. That was fun revisiting it. It was interesting revisiting that.
It's funny. I've had that debate a couple of times with like film friends, where I mean, of course it's a Western, but they're like, Blazing Saddles, really? They're like, I can see it one of the great comedies. I'm like, well, then you're, with all due respect, then you're missing some of the genius of Mel Brooks, because anytime Mel Brooks makes a quote unquote genre picture, the genius of him. Yes, of course he's funny, but it's the way he kind of like subverts all those like genre tropes and expectations. And I can't think of any play. I mean, Young Frankenstein is like a real close second, but like, Blazing Saddles is, I mean, it's what I always say about that movie is like it's it's not just ahead of its time, it's alone in its time. Like nothing
Yeah.
else did what that movie did. And it's funny for me because like I think about growing up, like my parents weren't like my parents are like very like highly educated, like East Coast liberals, and we like moved to the Midwest. And so they're like very smart, like open-minded people. Um, they were at the March on Washington and all of that stuff. So and yet I
Wow.
remember them like vocally hating that movie because like of how often like they use the N word and like and like and the farting scene and all this stuff. They were just like, oh, it's just like, and it took me
The
years.
arm scene.
Well, and so that was always in my head of like, oh, this is not a good movie. It might be funny, but like, but then in high school, I like rediscovered it and was just kind of old enough or mature enough to realize like, no, like this is actually like crazy subversive humor. And then all of that stuff aside, just the like social and political stuff aside, like the ending when they literally break the fourth wall is like it's so kind of just genius of and I'm like, if there was ever one moment that so definitively said that like westerns are dead and we're done doing them, it's that. It's
Yeah.
that. I mean, yes, the Wild
Yeah.
Bunch, that's what everyone always says, but I'm like, my God, Blazing Saddles, like when it just bursts into like a, Busby Berkeley, like, whatever, like musical, it's just, I mean, if that's not, Brooks just saying like, okay, like this is over, like this.
Well,
What?
that's a good point about comedy, Mel. It's the end of the genre. That happens with all the genres. Spaghetti westerns, they go through a political phase and then they go to a comedy phase. And when they hit the comedy phase, it's dead. It's
Mm.
died. The kung fu craze went through that. The
Well,
Totally.
spaghetti western phrase
I'm
genre
wondering
with that.
superheroes are.
Yeah. Oh, it will. It'll
But they
happen.
have, but they
Yeah.
haven't. But no, the point I was going to make was that the knock against Spaceballs was always that
Totally.
Mel Brooks didn't like Star Wars or wasn't into Star Wars. He likes westerns. He likes Frankenstein, and that's
Yeah.
the reason that
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
yeah. Although I don't know how that works with Robin Hood and Dracula,
Yeah.
but sticking to the end of era, your next line of lists were the anti-westerns, and Blazing Saddles is also on that.
Yep.
But also, I still haven't figured out why I didn't want to talk about this because it's also probably one of my top 5 movies, McCabe and Mrs Miller.
Just,
Yeah.
I mean, what that was one of those films where I mean, I literally I was not aware of it in any shape or form until I got to film school, and I took a class of I don't remember what it was, but it focused on that like new Hollywood era, and that was one of them, and that was just one that like just blew me away. And I remember a lot of the other like kids in my class like not liking it because they were just like, it's kind of boring. And like, of course I get that, but for me, I was always more into like, right, but it's like you're waiting for the big like showdown, shootout, and then it's this awful, pathetic, like what a horror, just like it's everything that you never see in westerns, and like, and this moral ambiguity, like,
Well, there's also this like I don't know if that's one of the first ones or there's got to be other ones, but the thing of almost modern westerns now do, or especially Deadwood was big into this, is they're trying to do Darwinian capitalism of Manifest Destiny,
right.
and
I just watched The Claim recently, which has got a big Mccabe and Mrs Miller vibe to it.
Very much.
yeah. I of the 3 posters I have in the basement, the 4th one, which I almost bought off eBay, but it was like gonna be like $400, was this like it's this like vertical placard that had the original title. It's like the Presbyterian Church Wager when it was still called that.
Oh, that
But it
that was the original title of the movie?
yeah.
Oh, I don't know that story. Okay.
Well, I found a script online a few years ago, and I think that was on the title page. But I showed when I was still working as a projectionist, and we had the digital projector showed up. I showed McCabe and Mrs Miller to some friends, and they had that reaction that I think a lot of people have had on first reactions, including I think Warren Beatty, where they couldn't understand the dialogue.
Yeah.
But I mean, I just remember distinctly second viewing on from Mccabe and Mrs Miller. It's like, yeah, it's one of the greatest movies ever made.
I understand it. I get even to this day that it's like it's a little challenging for some people, but just though the films of that era are really kind of my wheelhouse, and like I just love like just the fact so many of them are just so like they subvert your expectations of whatever the kind of movie they were. That's clearly what directors at the time were kind of doing. So anyway, yeah, I love it.
Well, then next on your list is Dead Man.
Yeah. And it's funny that I think of that very much like McCabe and Mrs. Miller, in that it's like on the surface, it's so unsatisfying. It's like such an unsatisfying hero's journey.
Yeah, okay.
Again, like, I mean, people have to see it, but it's just like by the end, and like you're just like, it shouldn't end like this. Like you want your hero to have some, victory, and there just isn't one. But yeah, it's like, so yeah, I do, and I think part of why this is more of a personal thing, but it was like that film came out like right before I got to LA. I mean, I'm sorry, right before I got to New York. I was in LA for like 3 years, from like 97 to 2000. I don't remember exactly what year Dead Men came out, but it was right around then. And so like when I moved to New York, I subletted an apartment from another assistant editor who like went out to LA for like 6 months on a big movie and was like, "Oh, I have this place you can stay in while you get settled." And she had worked with Jarmusch on several films, I think including Dead Man. And so like she had this like framed poster up in the little dining nook in this small apartment in the Village. So I was like looking at every day. And back then, this is like very specific to New York, but any of your New York listeners will understand, there was this place called Kim's Video in New York, which
Kim's Video lives,
right, and it was like
beyond New York, beyond time and space.
Yeah, and I mean, R.I.P. I mean, to this day I miss that place, and I spent a lot of time in there. And there were at the time there were multiple locations, and so I would just like go over to Kim's Video, and I just, because of her, I knew who Jim Jarmusch was, and I had probably seen 1 or 2 of his movies in film school, but he hadn't sparked anything for me, at least at the time. So I went back and kind of like rewatched all of his films, and then just got like a whole new appreciation for him. And so it's just and I actually think it's like such an interesting performance for Johnny Depp too. Like,
Yeah. Like, I think some of his genre, like particularly Ghost Dog, I think in a genre standpoint, like they're like, it's weird because like Jarmusch is trying to do very little as possible, but like they're surprisingly dynamic, especially when he's doing genre. But have I ever told you my story of whenever I did an episode recently with my brother, and one of the points I realized my brother and I were diverging was we were in a video store, and I hadn't seen any Jarmusch movies, and I wasn't even sure I wanted to rent this, but we passed Dead Man on the video store's aisle, and he looked at the cover, picked it up, kind of thought for a second, and I wasn't sure if he was going to pick it or not. And my brother just put it back down, and with disgust on his face goes, "Who would want to see a goddamn black and white Western?"
Yeah. Well,
isn't there a lot of good black and white Westerns? I'm just gonna put that
Weren't they all that way up to a point?
Yeah. Some of your contemporaries I haven't seen. Your last category is contemporary Westerns, and you had started out with Pale Rider. Speaking of Eastwood, which I thought Ted was going to be, you would want to do that one.
It would be interesting to revisit that. I don't think I've. And you calling it a Pale Rider contemporary?
Well, that's a loose term. I think in terms of like, because there really was that period where they just like were not making many. And I feel like I'd have to kind of look on IMDb to see exactly when certain movies were produced. But that I remember was like, I don't think Eastwood had done much Westerns like for a while before that. I mean, he'd done all the Dirty Harry stuff, and I'd have to go back and like look again. I could be like a little.
It was definitely an oddball out of nowhere. Oh, it's a comeback.
Yeah,
Western comeback. It was one of those. Yes.
And so it felt that in my life, I think of it that way. It was like the first time where I was like, oh, like Eastwood made another Western, and it's really good. And it probably has my favorite line of a movie. Something I find weird ways to quote this line so often in my life, which is nothing like a good piece of hickory.
Well, I just thought with using the word contemporary, you were referring to the time.
You mean modern?
No. I just meant
like the 1906 setting,
much more contemporary. Like
I got you.
I just didn't know how to like call them, but I did think like it's almost like latter day, not in the classic time when everyone was.
Because on this list, that is the oldest of them. Because the rest of them are, I think the rest of them are odds.
The Pale Rider too is, at the time I was, I'm following Clint Eastwood's career very closely. I did my 8th grade term paper on him.
Oh, wow.
Ding! Another story I've heard 5 times.
And I ended the whole thing going, one day he'll be a big superstar. So
that's crazy, man.
But Pale Rider, I was like, this is kind of like High Plains Drifter meets Shane. And, it just didn't seem to be, I love High Plains Drifter. I think that's just, it's just a bizarre, so strange. And I thought Pale Rider was, they used the title, a little pale.
Well, I'm having trouble thinking of the first Western I saw in a theater that was a contemporary coming out the year, like when I was watching movies. I mean, to be fair, we didn't go to the theater as much when I was a kid, but like you said, I was raised in an era when Westerns were coming out.
We can do it down the road. We can do a Pale Rider episode.
3:10 to Yuma, the remake, the James Mangold remake.
Yeah, I think it's super solid. And most of the ones you're about to read, like these are the ones we really did kind of like. Potsy was like, you should rewatch all of these, and I was like,
okay,
cool.
Okay.
And actually, I shouldn't say that. He did not say that specifically. I realized, and now this is just as more of like an editor thing. It's like I don't even know where I got this, but I guess it's just kind of how I'm built. But it's like if I'm going to work on something that's like really new for me in terms of films I've already like edited, especially in terms of genre, I tend to do like a really deep dive, kind of research deep dive in like, what do those films look like? What do they have in common? Where do the great ones try to diverge? Keeping in mind, like, I'm not the director, I'm the editor.
Right.
So I'm one way or another, I'm kind of stuck with the dailies I'm given.
Yeah.
But then the question is kind of like, well, what does one do with those elements when they get them? So, I did a film a couple of years ago called We Summon the Darkness. It was like a kind of like an 80s horror thriller. And I mean, I grew up on those movies. I mean, all the classic 80 kind of slasher thriller movies, like really grew up on them. So it was kind of like in my DNA in a way that I hadn't realized. And when I went back and started like rewatching some of the classics, but then also watching some like more modern ones that were calling back those classics, you do realize like there is a bit of a stylistic vocabulary that comes that are like endemic to that genre. So with the Western, that was a big thing for me. And, not to get too granular, but I assume there are probably other like, editors or up and coming editors who listen to your podcast. It's like, as editors, people often, I think the general public doesn't understand this. Like one of the questions I had, and it may sound funny, but I think you'll get it totally, is like a gunfight, right? Every Western's going to have a gunfight. I knew this one was no different. I read the script. I was like, okay, there's a couple of gunfights in this. How do you cut a gunfight? Like, that's not something I learned in film school.
Well, what did I ask? That's interesting. I one of my questions to Shane, I go, I want to know how difficult it was to cut that gunfight in the trees at the end. Was the two guys, the very last one. I'm like, where is your point of gravity and your pacing and everything? I was like, man, that must have been really interesting for you to cut that.
I love that term you just used, because you just hit on the thing I was trying to figure out how to explain, like point of gravity, right? Like another way you could say that is, how does point of view work in a shootout, right? Like we have our hero and we know like our film has absolutely been generally from his point of view. But one of the things this film does, and I think it's fine, is like we do occasionally change point of view. We do go to the villain's point of view sometimes, where like we are privy to conversations that our heroes have no clue about. and that's fine. Like, I think films can absolutely like kind of go omniscient sometimes. Um, but like in a shootout, it's kind of like, are you doing, you know, are you doing like a Tarantino thing where it's supposed to be like balletic and it's an appreciation of the like the quote unquote art of violence and the choreography? Whereas, and sometimes the answer is yes, of course. I mean, the Kill Bill movies are like great examples. Like, some of the I think some of the greatest like combat scenes, ever are in some of those movies. But in this, it was like, but this is much smaller. So I was watching a lot of the films, especially the ones on the current bit of list that you're reading now, to
Mm-hmm.
like see how they did it. And sometimes it's as the minutia gets down to like, are you seeing the person fire the gun or are you seeing the person get hit by that shot? Because and
Sure.
of course the third option is, well, you're seeing both, right? You need to see both. You need to see who fires the weapon and where that bullet goes. But getting to one of the films that I'm sure it's on that list you're about to read, and we're going to talk about Open Range, is like Open Range is a great example of like that final shootout in the town was a case where Potsy was like, watch this and then rewatched it because that's what we're going to try to do with the ending of Old Henry. And he's like, that's the model. And he's like, we're not trying to copy it, but like, he's like, I love how, and the word he used, or maybe the word I used to him was the clumsiness of that final gun battle in Open Range.
Okay.
That's what it was. And we were like trying to come up with it. And I don't remember if he said it or I said it, but I was like, oh yeah, like it's clumsy. It's not, it feels very unchoreographed. They miss like crazy. No matter how trained, no matter who Henry actually is, and no matter what his previous experience was 25 years ago, just like the Kevin Costner character in Over Range, like hitting a moving target with a 6-shooter is extremely difficult. Like in real life, it's extremely difficult. It's a short range weapon. It is not, marksmen are not using that kind of gun. And so if you're like on the run and your opponent is on the run, like you are 95% of the time you are going to miss that person. So it's very much like and what I loved about both of those movies is there is this sense of like, I only have so many bullets. I really need to kind of like make sure that I have an angle on this person. And if I don't, how am I trying to draw them out? And of course, there's that great bit in Open Range where he like his only shot is to shoot the guy in the toe because it's like all he can see. The guy's like hiding in a doorway and like he has no other angle on him. But by shooting the guy in the toe, he kind of flushes him out. And while we didn't do that gag specifically, it that was the feel of like, so that's I guess a very long way to answer your question of like the final shootout in the trees of Henry. I know Potsy was like, we don't want it to be neat. We don't want Henry just to be this like crazy dead eye where he's just, riddling him with bullets because he can hit anything in front of him. It's like, nope, it's, keep in mind, like it's also probably been 25 years since he held that weapon. And like, yes, of course there's muscle memory, but like you're also rusty. Like you don't just hit everything you shoot at. And
well, it was a little frustrating when Tracy Atkins, his brother-in-law, says "Hellstorm is about to come," or what you're about to. But it doesn't really happen at first. There's that little reprise. They go back in the cabin and then come back out for the big shootout.
Your first reaction whenever you were saying it was to quote the Unforgiven thing about the guns going off, and you start talking about the evolution of like the neatness of gunfire.
Yeah, that whole ever since Unforgiven and White Earp and a bunch of films with the guns not working, you got to get close. It's all been deglamorized, much from what we grew up on as kids,
of course,
which is I've very been interesting to see that happen. But I almost wanted you guys almost to steal a scene from Open Range, because and I'm glad you said the Dorf again. Tracy Atkins says long-winded, and I'm like, this guy is just talking up a storm. I mean, who does that?
It's a great line.
Who does that in real life? And I was hoping that Blake Nelson was just going to go up and shoot him right away, just like the way Costner does the gunslinger in Open Range.
Remember that is a great.
He dispatches him right away, and I think get Dwarf out of here, just get him done. But I mean, understand you wanted to get the one-on-one in the tree sequence, but
right. But I will say, like, and I I'll try to keep this spoiler free for people that haven't seen.
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
No. I'm saying I will, but I will say, like, we do kind of do that moment if you remember with Dwarf.
I think you.
Like, it's
you kind of
yeah,
and
true.
I mean, it's like the all I'll say is the speed at which that moment happens is the giveaway, of kind of what you're talking about, like the Costner moment of just like I'm just going to shoot this guy dead in the middle of his speech, like,
right.
which you don't often see. Like,
of course,
for what it's worth, I was telling Ted this earlier. I was still projecting to the theater on film and watched that Open Range trailer a bunch. And that moment is in the trailer.
Oh,
they don't show the obvious reaction, obviously, but that thing is shot in the trailer.
I was going to say also, also that you got that sequence in Wild Bunch where at the end, where they're all four standing there, and they just go ahead and haul off and shoot Potsy or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like time just stands still, and you think that they can almost get away. They can almost walk out, and then all hell breaks loose.
Yeah,
but and there's also that release of just like, get the hell on with it. Like it just moves everything so fast. Do we want to? You got 3 more on the list. Like let's go through them real fast. You had Hostiles, the Scott Cooper Hostiles.
I said it right on the list. I adore that movie. Adore it. Like I also have I enjoy movies that aren't afraid of kind of exploring like the darkness of it all. And I mean, I love that. And I don't want to give away like all the secrets, but it's like, let's just say the tone. Well, you should watch the end of that movie and then watch the end of Old Henry, and you'll go, oh, okay. Oh, okay.
You had the Coen Brothers True Grit, which I feel like the Coens are kind of the easiest modern people that have made the Westerns work more in the iconography of the West, whether it's No Country or not, or True Grit.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. Come to think of it, I absolutely should have put No Country on the list of end of an era, because it's like, I mean, that is literally the whole, like, Tommy Lee Jones's last speech in that movie is about like the world has changed. It's just not what it was, and I don't know how to live in it anymore.
The title incarnate, yeah. After the new version came out, I finally read the Charles Portis novel, which is amazing. It was my first Charles Portis, and he is such a and it seems like he's come up more. And then finally, another movie so close to my heart: The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
So good.
I wish you could see the long version of that.
I'm fine with it.
Wait, the which one? The
of Jesse James. There's a longer version out there. I mean,
I don't think it's out there though.
Oh no, it was.
There's not out there.
Yeah, I've read. I don't know if it like actually exists in a viewable form, but
speaking of your list, so Unforgiven's not on there, right? What did you think? What's your take on Unforgiven?
Listen, it's great. I mean, I do love it. I'll be totally honest. There's a weird. I mean, I want to be like very clear. It's a great movie. It deserves all the accolades it gets. I do understand like all of that.
I have a problem with it though, and I'm the same with you. I love it too.
Well, and I'll tell you where mine is. This is just one of those things that it's like hard for me to get over. If I'm right, that movie came out when I was in film school. Again, it's hard to remember exactly like what year, and I think if I'm right, it ended up being up against Malcolm X for Best Picture.
Oh,
and
okay.
I thought and continue to think Malcolm X is like a masterpiece, like just an absolute cinematic masterpiece that has never gotten its true due.
I think I don't know.
That's interesting too.
I mean, Do the Right Thing obviously has such a big spot, but I think some people like I was a lakeover to Malcolm X. I think that's just those are the only 2 Spike Lee movies I own.
That's interesting too, because considering the Spike and Clint's feuds they've had over the years.
Well, it is. I mean, and not for nothing. So like I remember when I'd seen Unforgiven and I did like it, but when Unforgiven won over Malcolm X, I mean, I was again, I was also probably like 19 or 20, but I was like, this is bullshit. Like,
No, I get it because it's funny. We're gonna. I mean, I don't know. We're gonna get to Dances with Wolves a little, but Dances with Wolves' reputation has been just completely sullied by beating Goodfellas, and there's no real reason because Dances with Wolves
or Ordinary People beating
yeah, exactly.
There's so many.
And I think the modern day Oscars are a little worse once campaigning took over. I heard someone once describe that like a mediocre film winning a Best Picture thing is the worst thing that can happen to it for posterity. Like people will then suddenly forget it and be like, it beat a much better film. Like
sure, and I understand. I mean, listen, that's why. I mean, awards. I mean, it's the inherent problem with awards in general because you are often comparing apples and oranges, and like it becomes a popularity contest. That's fine. Again, it takes nothing away from the quality of Unforgiven. It's an amazing film. It deserves to kind of be in the pantheon. But I fully admit, like I've never been able to kind of get over that like young, hot-headed reaction I had of
especially in college. It's just gonna happen.
Well, my problem with it is it's not really a problem, just observation is. It's just kind of like this Clint doing this anti-violence thing, all the way through it's something about killing a man. He tells the kid and he's giving it up. He's got 2 kids, can barely get on his horse, blah, 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 just on and on and on. But then what do we have at the end? Clint coming out and doing his thing, it almost undercuts the whole, first part of the film.
Well, right. But I mean, that's fair. But I would argue like, but it's that idea that the time in which they lived didn't allow that philosophy, right? It's like you are living in a place where these are the consequences of these things. And so it's like, I mean, it comes down to, do you leave the wanton, murder of your oldest friend go unanswered? And at a certain point, it's like, I can't answer that question, but it's like, I think that's kind of, it's like, well, it doesn't change the fact that he still is this guy, who has had a life of, of dead bodies around him. So
just very, very clever, I thought, because he was almost like he had his cake and eat it too, because you had the Clint Eastwood moment at the end, but you had some different territory for Clint to play in, as opposed to previous films like that.
Is this now time to officially, completely, and utterly hour 10 in to go to Open Range?
Yeah, please, absolutely.
Open Range opened on August 15th, 2003. I was still working at the movie theater. That same weekend, American Splendor, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, and Freddy vs. Jason came out. One of the first things I noticed in the shots, Ted and I were talking about, because he watched some of the deleted scenes, from Costner's other movies, he likes the big open vistas, the wide shots, the scenery. There's a VFX supervisor credit on it, and you can see one of the first shots looks pretty much a sky replacement. He does a lot of digital sky replacements.
I've read some about that the clouds are all like kind of put in. I can't say I did notice that. I also admit, like in my rewatch, I had to do it on my laptop just because it was on Amazon Prime. So like, I mean, it was fine. I could see it fine, but it's not the same. I probably would have noticed it better on a bigger screen.
Yeah, there's one kind of fake cloud shot earlier, but I mean, also like those other movies, he probably had he used to have bigger budgets and longer time to like get those naturally. But when did you first see it?
Late, really late. I definitely did not see it when it came out. I have a vague memory of just kind of shrugging it off as like.
It took me a month before it came out before I saw it, because the weird thing is Postman had its reputation, which I rewatched Postman yesterday, and that's something to talk about.
Yeah.
And then Dances with Wolves. The weirdness with Dances with Wolves was for the longest time the theatrical cut wasn't available. Yeah. They only had the extended version. So Costner was known for bloat. And I remember when I rewatched this, like I thought I was kind of surprised it was over 2 hours, because I remember it being leaner than I was expecting.
Yeah,
and to the point.
Yeah, I saw it in the theater, and I saw, go back to Dance with Wolves. I know some people. I know now does it get dumped on sometimes now, because like the way Forrest Gump gets dumped on. But
no, I think if anything, going back to my Goodfellas point, its reputation's been resuscitated.
But
for a while it wasn't.
I absolutely had loved it. I saw it 3 times in the theater. and I was sold on Costner as a director and what he did, blah blah blah. I know there's got, he's concerned about the Indians and ecological that maybe a Union soldier wouldn't have back then or something like that.
Sure.
I mean, sure, but I just adore, because I'm a sucker. I grew up. See, Kevin's like 3 years older than me. And I remember him when he went up to get his Oscar, he went by Richard Harris and he goes, "That's King Arthur." He grew up on the big epics like I did, and he loves those big epics. So I was a sucker for this. And Postman's, is another big epic. Mm-hmm. So I was ready for Open Range. It was fine. And a good Western, of course, like we said with Paul Ryder, they were far and few between at the time. Yeah. So I loved it when I saw it in the theater, and I enjoyed it again just watching it for this podcast. But I did notice it's a little bit, I might be getting trouble by saying this. I thought it was funny. It's a little bit on the nose as a Western. You could almost like push it a few more.
Like it's Gary Cooperisms?
Well, it's just all the tropes and all the things all the accumulation of what Westerns were prior to it. It's almost, jammed into this thing in a way. And you can almost push it a few inches further, and it's going to be almost a caricature of a Western in some ways. But it doesn't go that far. And you got Duvall anchoring it. Of course, they got Robert Duvall doing his Lonesome Dove character ever since Lonesome Dove.
Well, per your Richard Harris point, I think one of the things that's really charming about the movie is, especially because Costner, even though his run isn't as strong, he has like those 3 great runs from the 90s we were talking about earlier, but he's not top billing of this, and especially for the first half, but most of the movie. This movie's so reverential for a guy who's like, sung on his own soundtrack for The Postman. It's reverential of Robert Duvall. It wants Robert Duvall to be the star of the movie.
100%.
And behold the acting prowess of Robert Duvall.
And I know he I heard like the studio wanted Costner's name on top billing, and he fought. He said, "No, I want Duvall to be first."
That's exactly what I was thinking. And Duvall had an accident where he broke some ribs on set off the horse.
I read that, which I was like, can you imagine? I mean, he was old then. I mean, like, a guy that age falling off a horse? It's like, that's...
There was a period he was supposed to do Gilliam's Don Quixote. Robert Duvall, I think, was.
Yeah.
Speaking of horse accidents, but speaking of post Lonesome Dove, I should ask Robert Duvall's accent. It's something over the years. Like, Robert Duvall's technically from New York, isn't he? Like, I know he lives in Virginia and he's lived on a farm, but him and Jeff Bridges are these people over the years who are just like, the saliva's gotten thicker, thicker and thicker.
Well, you think about, you think about the early Robert Duvall, and you think about in Godfather, the way he is
conversation,
and he's, I don't know, it's.
I watched Network the other day.
An urban everyman with not much flavor in a way. I mean, it works to his favor. But once he hit Lonesome Dove, he had that, and he does it in Geronimo. He does it in Open Range. He does it,
but over the years, it's gotten thicker and thicker. Yeah. And
and he does that little, that little breath thing he does, and a little hand gesture that
it's such a natural. I love it. I mean, it's a naturalistic gesture too. It's a nice gesture he always adds.
Well, that
to it,
first, can I admit something publicly that I've never told a lot of people, especially given that we're talking about Westerns?
Go for it.
I've never seen Lonesome Dove.
Oh, really?
I've never seen Lonesome Dove.
I mean, it comes up so often, and I hear it's like really good, like it's like worth the watch. I have never seen it.
Well, I want to read it, and like I don't know, it was only like not only have I not seen it, it took me like I think just last year I realized that's the movie Bogdanovich was going to make with John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart. That Larry McMurtry got tired of him waiting around for the script and then wrote the novel. And
okay,
yeah.
But yeah, I think you'll agree with me. Once you watch that, it's kind of ground zero for anything after that. He's kind of riffing off that character because he loved doing Lonesome Dove. But I do tend to forget, and I just found the DVD. I'm going to watch it soon. Tender Mercies, which he got his Oscar for.
Right, I actually did watch that.
And I need to watch that again, see if he's doing some of that Western character that he did in the latter period.
I mean, his character drinks in Open Range, but I mean, a big thing about Tender Mercies is like alcoholic trying to not drink.
Yeah, no. Yeah, well, it was a big affair that in the Open Range. They bring the bottle out when Moses comes back and they're all talking.
Yeah.
So back to the movie. Costner is not so much bloat, because especially like I feel like the first half hour, maybe 45 minutes. I wouldn't call it a tight movie, but it's direct. It moves along, and then it seems like it starts taking its time after a certain point, but not necessarily in a bad way. Like it just wants to hang out with its characters.
Yeah, I think like, and I heard, also in the run up to this, I like went back and like read some interviews and stuff, and I mean, he was pretty emphatic in a lot of the post, release publicity that like he wanted he was very defensive anytime an interview would like an interviewer would bring up like the word slow, but he was like, I wanted the beginning to be deliberate. I wanted you to deliberately get to know these people and why they're doing what they're doing and what their motivations are, before it becomes kind of plot driven of like, well, now this thing happened and so we have to go there, and like, and you definitely feel that. I mean, I don't know if you noticed this, but in my rewatch, I noticed, you know, there's a lot of fades to black. And
I noticed a lot of fades. I didn't pick up on the fades to black.
Well, is that really
what I'm getting at is like, so, now I understand that while yes, that can absolutely be an organic way to tell you that some time has passed, right? That we're like this moment is done and now we're going to the next moment. But there's a few times where I kind of noticed, I'm like, oh, they happen very quickly, like right at the end of a sentence. And I kind of know, or I suspect, of course I don't know, but I suspect that it's like, oh, they cut something out there. So
there's when Costner does his monologue,
they faded the stars, that strange cut there.
There's a dissolve there, and you can see his lips very distinctly.
He's still continuing to talk, and I'm like, I was trying to watch for edit points because I knew we were going to talk to two editors here, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of a huge. Sticks out to me.
I wouldn't say huge. It's one of those things you just hope people don't notice.
No, and I think most don't. Like, and I just know in my own career, I like it's. You can only make, regardless of the moment that we live in now, with films being digital and very easy to rewind and all that and pause. It's something I tell directors I work with all the time. You have to make your movie for one screening. You cannot worry about what people may do rewatching it or pausing. So if whatever the issue is works, if you only see the movie once, that has to be the right answer, because otherwise you will drive yourself crazy trying to fix things for the possibility that somebody might go back and freeze on this and be like, oh, look, this thing's wrong or whatever.
Well, that's one of the biggest examples of that. And I got shot down because I even brought it up with City Lights at the end with at the end he's holding the flower up by his face and talking to the girl. It's a really, the shots don't match, but it's one of the most classic scenes of all time.
Oh,
and
right,
and you go, no, Ted, shut up. It works. It's great. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. And I mean, it's like, again, listen, like half the internet is bad continuity videos now, and it's just like for editors that just makes you want to cry, because you're like, my God, it's like basically everything I was ever taught. Like these videos, like invalidate, and it's not true, you know what I mean? It's like but that's literally it's the history of cinema. I mean, it's like you can't have perfectly continuous edits unless you are shooting your film in perfect order, right? In scene continuity order, and you're spending a lot of money to make sure those things don't happen. And that's just not how movies are made, and it's not how they've ever been made. And you can't, as an editor, I know Shane knows this, it's like, it's something you learn the first time you start cutting anything, is just, oh, I can't get hung up on this. Like you do your best to smooth it out and make it not draw your eye. But if the priority is plot or character or performance or all the things that are more important than continuity, you have to go to you have to lean into those things.
I've been known to say to a director, and I don't even believe this wholeheartedly, but I will glibly say this whenever the issue comes up, but continuity is for hacks. Like, just don't worry about it. Which, again, I don't actually believe it, but like, it's more, I think those videos, if something like that comes up, the issue there isn't so much, oh, they noticed that it didn't match. The issue more is that to me, it's twofold. Either it bumps so badly that someone noticed. The bumps are what you really got to look out
Sure.
for. So if it takes someone out of it, then oh yeah, sure, no,
I agree. Then you should try to fix it. Yes.
But more importantly, like, you did it for a reason. You've seen it more than anybody else. You know it doesn't match, of course, but you left it in there because you thought no one's going to care, because people are going to be going with the emotion or the scene or what's going to be happening. And if they figure it out, you're like, oh no, the scene didn't work as best as well as I thought it did.
Yeah, I mean, I will always remember when I was young and coming up. It's like I had this amazing opportunity to, kind of be an intern on this film with Don Camburn and Billy Weber.
You work with Billy?
Well, I mean, that's a stretch. I did not work with Billy. I was in the edit room on a movie he was editing, and I mean, I knew him. I spent a summer with him, but it was like, he was busy doing his thing.
What was the movie?
It's called Little Giants.
Okay.
But I remember Don very specifically. For those sorry, I realize like I shouldn't just be like name dropping without a reference. Like, so we're talking about two like very like legendary editors. Don Camburn, like one of his first features he ever cut was Easy Rider. So it's like the guys, I mean, we're talking about legit,
devises a completely new cinematic transition.
Yeah. So I remember him saying, at one point, like, well, as an editor, you get all the blame and none of the credit. And I think that was probably more true in his day, only because like, being a film editor was so specific. There were relatively speaking, so few people doing it. It was widely understood, like you truly had to have like a level of expertise to have that job. It was very hard to break into. You had to climb a very long ladder. Nowadays, obviously, it's a little different. There's a million ways to become an editor, maybe not like doing big films, but still. So, if anything, I think it's like, I'm glad, like, that we don't, it's still always true that we don't ever get any of the credit. And that unfortunately is just the reality of the job, because most people have no idea what we do, or the extent of what we do. But like I said, that's my thing about, like, for instance, like these YouTube videos about continuity. It's like, even if they're not saying it, the implication is like, look how badly this was edited. And to your point, Shane, it's like, I guarantee you that the person that bothers most is the original editor, who probably worked their ass off to try to prevent that thing from happening. And it was probably happened because of either like shoddy production, or an actor not doing what the actor was supposed to do, whether it was like hitting their mark or picking their cigarette up with the wrong hand or whatever, or a like a like a latter day cut, so to speak, meaning something that in the edit room they're like, oh, you know what, this has to come out, and there might have been a really good reason why this has to come out, but by taking that thing out, you've now created a continuity problem with whatever came before it and whatever came after it. And that happens all the time, and it's unavoidable. But I just had it happen literally last week, where like we're about to lock this film, but a thing got raised in a test screening, and we're like, oh crap, yes, that is confusing. None of us caught that line makes something confusing. So it was like, well, we know the line has to come out, but just because of how the scene was shot, I was like, ugh, I have to, like, the actor who says the line moves on it. So by taking the line out, the actor now jumps from this one body position to a different body position. And even though I had lots of coverage of it, the move is always on that line. So it's suddenly, I like, after spending an hour on it, I was like, well, I've done it the best I can, but no matter what, it's going to be a bit of a bumpy cut. And I'm just going to have to take the hit.
The worst is when you have to do those cuts at the last minute. Those are the ones where you're like, all right, we made this decision, like, we hope it works, and then you live with it.
Yeah. And I told the joke I make with directors sometimes is like, I've been doing this long enough now that I allow myself one bad cut in each movie without like obsessing about it, right? Knowing that's like, hey, if there's 1,500 to 2,000 edits in a dialogue driven film, like if I have one like bad cut that I will always see, like that's pretty good. Like I did I should be able to live with that. If it's more than one, I start to get real like antsy and try to do whatever I can to try to fix it. Because I mean, listen, we have at a certain point, you're like, that's the only reflection of my work on this movie is like that you don't notice this stuff. And
yeah, I mean, I part of me is like, Tarkovsky titled his book "Sculpting in Time," so it's the time, like time. If everything feels real time, then sure, maybe that's wrong. But movies manipulate time all the time,
Right.
so it's just like I can argue like, who cares? I don't know. Again, it's really if it bumps or anything else.
Yeah.
I did want to say on one of these episodes I interviewed friend Thomas Vingras, and he had a variation on your phrase where we always get blamed. And I found it more profound and kind of true in my experience, because when I have gotten credit for something, there's a majority of the time I'm like, I don't deserve the credit for that.
Right.
Like that scene was shot well,
Right.
or that scene was just acted so well,
Yeah.
and you just presented it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, then you get the blame on things you don't deserve.
I mean, yes, listen, it's happened in every editor's career, but I can think of a couple reviews I've read over the years of films I worked on where like thank God they've never like called me out by name, thank God, but they've said like, oh, this thing, they've mentioned a problem with the editing or the pacing, and of course you're always like, but like that was the decision to do it that way was necessitated by these other forces, right?
I do take cold comfort in the fact that a lot of film critics, I'm shocked at how little they their framing of it is often like pace seems to mean go fast.
Absolutely.
Like it's or slow and unengaged kind of blend in. So like I don't take it to heart too much, but
yeah, it is good advice to just not read your own reviews. Like, I'm down to the point now where I generally just read like the headlines to just find out like did Variety like it? Did it not like it? Because I'd like to know that. I just want to know what the general reception is. And if someone says like, oh my God, there's this amazing review and such, like I'll read it, but I don't troll the internet anymore like I did when I was starting out on the rare occasions where a film I cut was getting those reviews, just because at that point, to be honest, you're like, oh my God, it's the first time something I've worked on is getting reviewed by Variety. And like, that's an amazing, for those of us who make movies, you're like, it's a big deal when that happens the first time. Like you kind of know like, oh, that's cool. I've done something that is being looked at by like actual tastemakers. And
I think for, it's a more bigger deal for me, because then it's like, I get my next job off momentum. So if like this movie's liked, then
yeah,
my name's going to be on somebody's eyes for a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes that's true. Although I've also sometimes it's not. I mean, it's like sometimes the films can just go off and have a life, and it's like, that whole thing of like, if I don't necessarily believe this, but if it's like if great editing is invisible editing, like then you yourself as the editor are sometimes just kind of invisible. And
yeah,
like
that's very true.
it's like, oh, it's all about the cinematography, and you're like, because you can measure that, right? You can objectively say there are gorgeous shots in this movie, but again, no one really understands what we do, and so it's very hard to pinpoint like, oh my gosh, that's so well cut. Like you and I can do that, and other editors can do that, and even directors can watch something and be like, man, that was really well cut, and you hope they notice. But journalists don't really know what well cut means. And like,
what really gets to me, it's not the journalists or the critics, it's producers.
Well,
when producers don't understand what went into editing, that's the one that always kind of makes my blood boil a little.
Well, it can be real disheartening, because they're often the ones like hiring you, or at least getting you into the room, and it's like, right, so if they don't get it, like you're like, I feel
or even pre-COVID sharing an office with you, and you're just like, why do you think we took so long to do this? What do you think we've been doing?
Yeah. I'll just add real quick. I'm like, I can't tell you how many times I've said the words, what do you think we've been doing?
Often. Laughter dissolves into tears. Have you ever had to edit actor director who was in their own movie?
Actually, many times. Like, well, I shouldn't say many, several times. To the point where it became like I was being told, like, by my agent that, like, they were getting calls about that, right? Like that.
It became an identity point, a hiring point.
Yeah, I mean, even if it wasn't, I mean, in several cases, I didn't end up doing those movies, but like, and that's cool. I mean, my very first film that I edited on my own was an Ed Burns film called The Groomsman. So Eddie acts in all his
I
stuff,
saw that on your IMDb and I had to ask about it.
um, and it was an amazing first experience. I'm incredibly grateful for that experience because if you know anything about Ed Burns, like, I mean, he's just a very I mean, he's just a friendly guy, and he doesn't buy into his own celebrity like in any
Okay.
way that I saw. I mean, he says it all the time, but he's like, I'm just a guy from Long Island, and you're like, right, like, and that is how, when you're with him, that is how he comes across. So he like literally, like, on the like first day of production, I remember him calling me and saying, I got in the first day dailies. He was like, "How they look? How they look?" And I was like, "Looks good, man." Like, so I mean, it's only day one, but like everything looks fine. And I remember him saying, "Listen, you know, just so you know, because he often works with a lot of the same people, like from project to project to project. He's had the same DP like his entire kind of career. So he's like, just so you know, the way I work, like, because I'm like directing and acting, it's very hard for me to like judge my own performance. So on set, I've got like my producer Aaron, who is like my trusted, my consigliere, who will tell me if like we need to go again, or and he's like, and I also have my DP. He's like, but I'm really looking to you to be that third voice. So like he's like, so I do not need you to be deferential. Like, I need you to be
Okay.
honest. So he's like, if there's like any performance issues, and he's like, especially my own, like, I please chime in and let me know, because I want to know while there's time for me to adjust. And that was like, it was a really like helpful lesson in, the modesty is the wrong word, but like, I understand. It's like, right, he knows his face is going to be first on the poster, so he does want to protect his own performance. And now, obviously, I mean, I came to understand very quickly in my career that that's a big part of an editor's job, um, is to protect, especially a good performance. Sometimes it can be to fix a bad performance, but if
Right.
someone's really if you're getting the kind of dailies where you're like, "Holy crap, this person is like really bringing it," then I very, very actively feel that sense of like, I'm responsible for making sure this amazing work ends up in the final movie. And sometimes the way to do that is to like be really like critical and go like, is
Yeah.
this moment up to snuff of what they've been giving me before, or is this take better? So Eddie really helped me like get into that, and then I've subsequently done a couple of others. Most recently, a couple of years ago, this film Critical Thinking, that was John Leguizamo's directorial debut. And amazingly, the first day I sat down with John, he said the exact same thing, in not in slightly different words, but he was like, "Look, man, like, don't be precious about my performance. Like, I need you to be honest." Because he was also directing himself, um, and by that point, I like it didn't. On my first film with Eddie, there was kind of this like, uh, okay, I feel awkward being the one to tell you if I think your acting's not great. By the time I got to
Right.
John, I felt way more confident about that and was like, thank you for saying that. No problem. Like, I will absolutely, because I understood at that point, like, it is kind of it's an important part of the job, and like, you can't get wrapped up in this person's like celebrity or anything like that. It's like they're trying to make a good movie, and you just need to help them.
Well, without naming any names, have you had any experiences where someone said that, but you really got the clue, a certain point that that wasn't 100% the case? Where, like, don't sugarcoat it, but by the way, sugarcoat it.
That's a okay. two parts to that answer, and yeah, I definitely won't name any. It was not a director, meaning it was not an actor director, but it was a filmmaker who had someone very close to him in the movie. And I'm gonna just leave it super vague as that, but like someone that they cared about in a certain way was in the cast, and they did tell me that initially, and then that person was really problematic. Their performance was really problematic, and so we started trimming back on lines. And all I can say is I guess this was never explicitly said to me, but I definitely felt it. Apparently, I crossed a red line of how much of the part I was cutting out. And so then no, I mean, I don't want to make it wasn't like I got fired or that they like came in screaming, but it suddenly the tone changed and was like,
how did you find out?
well, because literally the director was kind of like, it went from, yeah, like do your thing, man. Like that's that's part of the job. I get it. And if something's not good, then work around it, or if you have to cut it out, or blah blah blah. But then at a certain point, weeks later, it was like, hey, like I noticed you cut another line from so and so's part. Like I'm just curious why. And I was like, well, because it wasn't good or whatever. I don't. It's hard to remember back the specifics, but I remember I was like, it would just work better if I pull this line out. It doesn't change the story, and it keeps this person from having like a very like awkward moment where you can see the actor like trying to remember their lines and like not really being in the in the moment. And I said that, and then the reaction was kind of like, okay, yeah, well, I mean, let's put it back in though and see. And when that happened a few times, it became clear that the director had heard that this person wasn't happy having all their lines cut out.
Okay.
And it was like, again, so that it was never explicitly said to me, but it at a certain point you start to like, you get it. And you're like, okay. So that was one occasion. The other time, again, it was not an actor director. It was a writer director. And I've worked with a lot of writer directors. And
I've
that
worked with a few writer directors too. Yeah.
be tricky because they are the person that like birthed the idea usually, and and I get it, and I actually think I do pretty well with these people because I've had a lot of experience with it. But it's very hard for them to, no matter what they tell you, and they always tell you, oh, I'm not precious, like I want the best movie. I mean, they always say the same thing, and some of them truly do mean it and are great about it. Then occasionally
a lot of them want to mean it too.
I know, but and I get this. It's like I really do understand how hard it must be for a person like that, a filmmaker like that, especially if they're like I started writing this like 12 years ago, and I've done 2 movies, like, this is the movie I couldn't get made, or like, we were about to go 2 different times with 2 different casts, and then things fell apart, and like now I finally made the movie, and you're telling
this
me
has been in my head for decades. Yeah.
Right. And especially if it's like, it's put it this way, this never usually happens with lines. It's usually that point when, I kind of call it the come to Jesus moment, where I like, usually we're like pretty well into the director's cut. We've screened the movie a bunch of times, and and I'll like turn around in my chair and kind of look at them and go, so I have a suggestion. I don't think you're gonna like it. And they go, I said, so I just want to like, I want you to like be prepared. And they go, okay, what? And I go, I think the movie is better if we like take out this scene. Like, and here's why. And I always make sure to like immediately go into why. I go, it not only does it solve this problem, but now these 2 things are closer to each other. And so now this makes a lot more sense why this thing happened. But this thing in the middle is like, the term I often use is like, it's an off ramp. We were on the highway, but we suddenly exited.
I've heard others use that term.
And it now takes us a minute to get back on the highway. And why do that? Like, yes,
I've heard that metaphor exactly used before. I don't know who originated it.
Me neither. And I don't even know like where I've heard it. If I'm sure someone I've worked with, but it's very apt. It's like you're going 70 on the freeway. Suddenly you slow down to 40, and now now we're dealing like, now we have to go pee. And it's like, but now you have to get back on the the on ramp just to get back onto the freeway to get where you're going. And I mean, it is a pretty apt metaphor. So I, and I will often say, like, and to be clear, I love the scene. The scene works great. It's not because
Right.
it's not good. But it is not good for the movie. Those can be, I've literally had to have that conversation in, I think, probably every film I've ever cut. Maybe with the exception of Old Henry, and we can, well, only
Wow.
because that script was just airtight. Like there was almost nothing left on the cutting room floor of that film,
I
just
was gonna
because
ask
the
about.
script was so, you could tell how much work he had done on this script. I mean, he even said, he goes, endless drafts. Like he said, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many drafts. It's many, many dozens. And
How long had he been holding on to this for a while?
that's a good question. I never thought to ask him that. Like, when did he first kind of birth it? So I don't know that it was something he's like been, trying to bring to the screen for like decades. I just think he just knew that in order to make this film with the budget he was likely to get, which was very small, you know, and like he even said to me, he's like, I'm a Nashville guy. Like, I knew I didn't have like I wasn't going to be able to afford myself all the tools and opportunities that like a filmmaker from like LA or something might be able to have. Like, I knew we
Sure.
were going to do it here, and it was going to be small. And if I got a big name actor in this part, I was going to be lucky. So he's like, I kind of knew, like, I just needed the script firing on all cylinders. Um, and certainly by the time it got to me, I was just like, damn, like this thing is crazy. I mean, that's why I immediately called my agent, was like, whatever it takes, I want to do this movie, because it's just so tight. Usually when
Walmart
I'm
movie
reading
be
scripts,
damned.
well, usually when I'm reading scripts for an interview, I'm making marks on places where like this is probably going to be an issue in the cutting room. And I want to bring that up with a director in an interview of like, hey, I'm curious, like, in my experience, this thing that happens in your script is often something we decide we want to cut later. Like, have you explored that? And I try to weigh like, how difficult is this going to be down the line. Anyway, that didn't happen with Old Henry, but on one occasion, I did have a young writer director, and all I'll say is that I was the second editor brought on to this particular film, and part of why the first editor left was because that editor could not convince this person to like make certain changes to the film, and the editor was just like, I can't do this anymore. Like, he that's what I was kind of told privately. And
Hmm.
I knew the other editor, and they were like, you might be better suited to this like job of like, you're really good with people that way, and I've kind of hit the end of my patience. And I was like, okay. So I knew
They
I was going
they
into a
say
call.
new set of eyes, but really they're asking for a different way of saying some reframing of
Sometimes, I mean, sometimes.
sometimes.
Like I said, in this case, it really was like the original editor was not let go; they left and
Okay.
asked me if I would be willing to step in, and it was like, sure. At the time, it was a great opportunity for me, so I was like, yeah, yeah, oh my god, of course. So in my head, I'm like, I'm going to make this work, like no matter what, because this is a good credit for me. And for a while, it went very smoothly, but then at a certain point, I started to hit the same wall that the original editor was facing, which is like the writer director just was like, yeah, but like I'd give this well reasoned, impassioned argument about why this thing should come out, and it will make it so much better, and blah blah blah. And I don't, when the response is like, yeah, I hear you, but I don't know, I like it. I think, I don't want to lose it. And you're like you didn't refute my
That particular
argument.
phrase, yeah,
It
like
it ends
I
up
know.
becoming like, because I said so. And you're like,
Yeah,
and once you
exactly.
hit that, and not for nothing, like that film suffered greatly because of that problem. Like didn't come out the way it should have, did not get the reviews it should have. Like, it's, there was a way better movie there, and that just never got made.
Yeah.
And it was too bad, because it really was like, I really liked that film. Um and not for nothing, like that film got taken away from that person. Like, at a certain point, higher up stepped in and was like, we can't do this anymore, and you're no longer welcome in the cutting room, and we're just going to finish it. So
Jeez.
I mean, which is unfortunate. It was really like an unforced error, I guess you'd call it. Like it was an error of youth. So, I on some level I understand, but on the other level, you're like, you have all these experienced people telling you that you might be shooting yourself in the foot, and yet you're just still loading the gun, and
Yeah.
okay.
And you didn't know that the opportunity was when it was gone. I think the main reason I was asking about the actor aspect is like the thing about Costner, especially for someone that got all these accusations of having a big ego with his movies and being involved with a lot of the parts. There doesn't seem like a lot. I don't know, especially not in Open Range being Duvall's movie. Like, it's not a lot of vanity in it. Like, I think you can maybe say there's some parts in Postman, more in Postman, a little in Dances of Wolves, but in Open Range, not really. Like, there doesn't seem like some vanity around the performance.
I agree with you totally. It really is a part of why I like the movie so much, and I think also a thing we haven't really touched on yet is, and I know Costner has said this, but like apparently Duvall, I mean, he's Duvall, so like he was ad-libbing a lot of stuff in that movie, and you can feel it. And I don't mean it in a bad way. Like, I just mean like there's interchanges between them that just feel so like, you're like, how would you even write that? And you realize like, well, they didn't. I'm sure the writing was more general about this person is trying to get this other person to say this thing, and like, apparently Duvall was just like real keen on like, no, I want to live in these scenes, especially with Costner, and like, you know, um,
I guess I didn't pick up on the ad libs, but it makes sense. Everything you're saying makes sense. I mean, ad libs is a big part of like invisibly putting that into a scripted story is part of is the sweet spot too. So
that's true, and the great, really good ad-libbing actors, again, especially somebody like, I mean, it's I say it's a skill like any other. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And somebody like
yeah.
Duvall is I've never worked on anything he's worked on, but I can only assume he's probably just a master of it, of like knowing what the script says and what the goal of the scene is, and then putting it into his own language so that you don't go off the rails. It's like the scene still hits the same beats. I've seen younger actors do it who are really good at it. I'll say, just because I like John Leguizamo he's a master at it, a master of just like taking whatever was written down, putting his own spin on the line, and it achieves the exact same thing. And you're like, wow, that's way better. Like,
I mean, I've had friends work with actor directors. I haven't. I came close a few times, and it just seems like it'd be hard. I was scared of doing it.
There's no question it can have its pitfalls. There were right before COVID, there was like a big one where I was in the running for it and I didn't get it, and it was fine. I never even like met on it, but when I heard who it was, I went,
Did you dodge a bullet?
Yeah, it was just like, just because of what I knew about this person, or which again could be completely untrue, but certainly there was a bit of a reputation that came attached to this particular person, and I just thought I could see being in an edit room. If that's true, it could be a nightmare job, because I could see it being the kind of thing where I'm constantly trying to break through like the ego. And so like when it didn't happen, I wasn't like super upset. I was like, may have dodged a bullet on that one.
Ted, one of the things we talked about before this was because I mean, it's weird with how like those three are it. Kevin Costner's first movie was a Oscar-winning movie, and then he's done two since then. One was a very, I don't know. When I rewatched it, I was on the fence between whether it's deserving of its reputation or not.
You mean The Postman?
Yeah. Ted, I think you've been a little more forgiving on The Postman.
Yeah, again, going back to what Kevin grew up on and liked, and his chance of directing, I think I was much more apologetic, more forgiving when I watched in the theater, and I thought I liked the bigness of it, going for it.
The bigness is a big part.
And it's a big swing. I mean, he didn't hit the ball maybe the whole time.
But. Well, the whole movie, the thing that's great about it is that it is trying to do a post-apocalyptic story that's wholly uncynical. The problems is when you do a future story, you're beholden to one way or another. You're beholden to what you got right and what you didn't, and what you got wrong is really takes you out. So just the premise itself is kind of hard to buy now. But I mean, but at the same time, it's big filmmaking. And Dances with Wolves. Oh, do you have any history with Dances with Wolves that you remember besides the being mad at like
I mean, not really. Only that I do remember loving it when it came out. I'm pretty sure that's one of those, like, I saw it a couple of times in the theater. Like, so beyond that, no. I mean, that's kind of all I can say about it. Is, I haven't seen it. Gosh, come to think of it, I haven't seen it in a long time. I mean, maybe 20 years.
It's on Netflix right now, but before I watched it, I hadn't seen it in probably maybe 25, 30 years. And one of my former guests, friend AJ Edwards, whenever the theatrical cut came out, I had to text him to remind me exactly but he has very distinct feelings. Like, he does not like the extended cut because in the theatrical cut, when he arrived to the base, they never explain exactly what happened, and in the extended cut they do, and he hates the extended cut for that. But the thing that struck me rewatching it is the first 20 minutes especially is really messy and weird in a good way. Like, it opens with his foot, them trying to remove his foot. He then tries to commit suicide on the battlefield, gets commended for it. Then when he gets to an outpost, there's this captain he talks to who speaks in this weird faux Shakespearean patois, and then pees in front of him. And then at minutes Costner walks out the door, kills himself in the window in front of Costner. All this happens in like the first 20, 25 minutes.
I can legitimately say the only part of that I recall is like the urination. I kind of do remember that being like, oh, you don't see that in movies very often, but
and as big and as much of we've talked also about the score too as being John Barry. His kind of late area bigness.
It's latter John Barry, which is more lethargic and big and not the tightness of that John Barry's jazz.
Well, he's going on the bigness and like the shooting's there, but there's also a lot of like first time director with a time and money, but first time director just basic geography issues sometimes here and there.
Right.
For someone who won Best Director on his first thing, there's certain. But the messiness is what makes it work too. Like I remembered it ending in a giant battle, and it totally doesn't.
You're talking about Dances?
Yeah.
But I think I think the magic of Dances too. Like you said, you said you went saw it a couple of times. I saw it 3 times. Like I mentioned earlier, where it's one of those. I think the magic of a great epic, a big film. It has all these little moments,
right,
that you want to go you just love so much, and you want to come back and see those little moments.
It gets the intimate details right.
Yeah, and so and they stick out. Not the bigness of it or the big scenes. It's just these little moments. And I guess that maybe it's just the fact that it's in this big film. That's why I think of Lawrence Arabia, Reds, all these films that have these little moments that you want to revisit again in this big canvas.
Well, I think the other thing that struck out about me was from our Glenn Frankel episode where we were talking about his High Noon book, his Searchers book. I was wondering if it was the same story from the Searchers that they were basing some of the Mary McDonald stuff and Dances with Wolves on.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, well, I remember that from Dances. Like, I feel like it's a pretty like direct nod.
Oh yeah,
to the Natalie Wood like bit.
The reoccurring thing with Costner is that, and it goes to what you were talking about, Jamie, earlier, when you were trying to learn the grammar of a Western or just the history of a Western, is Costner is very beholden to it. Like
is very what? Sorry?
Beholden.
Oh yes.
He's like everything is.
Well, the newest one with Diane Lane, Let Him Go.
Which I saw.
I haven't seen.
I mean, I just love I adore it, and it's all because of his Western gravitas that he has. He plays an ex-ranger.
Oh wow!
And it's set in the early '60s, late '50s, early '60s.
Okay.
But he's got that. He's like he's bringing the old West with him, and of course also he's playing with Diane Lane, and
Well, you and I also had this argument a few times. I think you have the better argument here, but is Costner's persona from when he first came on the scene to now? Especially back in the day, and I mainly introduced to Field of Dreams. I like to think that, especially in the late '80s, early '90s, he was our Jimmy Stewart, and Ted likes to think he's our Gary Cooper.
I think he's more Gary Cooper-ish than Jimmy Stewart-ish.
And I get your argument. I just think there's something. It's a Wonderful Life parallel to Field of Dreams is more strongly for me.
That's true, but that's really interesting. It's really I'm sorry, apologize. I may have to side with Ted a little more because I agree that the movie definitely has, like very strong overtones of like It's a Wonderful Life, but the way Costner inhabits that role, if we're going to make the comparison, I think you're right. Like, it's just hard for me to think of Kevin Costner as a Jimmy Stewart type, and yet I do understand why he's so often compared to Gary Cooper.
I can concede this argument. Ted's point was that Tom Hanks is our Jimmy Stewart,
which for sure, and it doesn't mean there can't be more than one, but
no, yeah. It also, I think maybe it also applies into the fact that Cooper and Costner represent a certain symbolic aspect of America, the history of the cowboy, the Western, and the. I know Clint Eastwood. They always said Clint Eastwood was from the Gary Cooper school too, but there's something about there's more American pie in Cooper and Costner than there is in Eastwood.
I think one of the things with the Costner movies that is kind of interesting is it feels like he's talking to the movies he's loved for most of his life, and there's some pretty big star movies, Hollywood Western movies. You had your big thing about his runs. You wanted to go on.
Oh no! I just noticed that I was trying to see how he you get a chance to direct, or you're in the director's, what do they call it, the when you get in trouble?
Director's jail.
Yeah, director's jail. But often he first, that incredible run he first has with Untouchables, No Way Out, Bull Durham, and Field of Dreams, all four back to back. So that and then he had a couple of ones that went on the radar. That's what got him Dancing with Wolves, probably. And then he comes back roaring again with Robin Hood, JFK, The Bodyguard, A Perfect World, and Wyatt Earp all back to back. I know Wyatt Earp didn't do what it was supposed to do, but that's a pretty good run.
That's an underrated movie. There's some really cool stuff in that film.
Well, I could go off on that. I would love to do an episode where we do Tombstone versus Wyatt Earp.
Oh my God, yeah, 100%.
Everybody loves Tombstone, and everybody goes off about Val Kilmer, and I'm just like, come on, guys, have you seen Wyatt Earp? Have you seen Dennis Quaid's?
Well, they're both. Holiday? That's why I do like them both quite a bit. There's different things I like about each one, but
right. But more people go for the.
I know you're right.
Yeah. And then he has right before it's a Postman, he does Tin Cup. Of course, Waterworld's in there though.
Well,
Waterworld. That was the movie I wish I had watched more than
with
Postman.
his buddy Kevin Reynolds, who did he did.
And the Joss Whedon script doctoring.
Yeah, and then after the Postman, it's like things that didn't really do well.
Well, that's the thing is like that's the period where I kind of want to be like defending him a little.
Well, Message in a Bottle, Love of the Game,
For the Love of the Game in particular. It's an underrated Sam Raimi movie that.
And
it's not good. It's not good.
And everybody was wanting Bull Durham, Field of Dreams, another baseball film, and Sam Raimi directing, and we go, oh, it's not working.
The baseball scenes in those movie really work.
And I love you, Sam. Don't if you hear this, but 13 Days, The Road to Graceland, 3,000 Miles to Graceland, Dragonfly. Well, I can't remember what.
I remember Dragonfly.
But then he did, and then out of that run, it comes Open Range.
Well, the ones you were after was like Upside of Anger and
Rumor Has It, The Guardian, Mr. Brooks.
Mr. Brooks is actually not that bad.
No, yeah, I just saw that in the last year during the pandemic. It was on, and I rewatched it, and I was like, "This is real. This is pretty good. This
is better than it has any right to be."
Yeah.
I actually remember enjoying Swing Vote, but it had some. I think it's more for specific things in it, not the.
Rumor Has It is like a really was a troubled movie, but.
But then lately, with the streaming and all the cable, Hatfield and McCoys, I heard everybody liked. I think a lot of people liked Hatfield and McCoys.
Have you watched any of Yellowstone?
And Yellowstone.
No, although I will. Literally everyone I know, old Henry completely aside, everyone I know is like, "Oh, you and your wife should be watching this." I was like, "Oh, okay."
I'm only like halfway through the first season. I think they're about to start the fourth season and do spinoffs. So I'm not. What a little I've seen, but like it just. I'm surprised that he still has only done the 3. He's still to this day, and it's not that
Wait,
like
the 3 what?
Directing only.
He's directed only 3
right.
movies.
Well,
he's produced a lot. He's his producing fingers, and he still is on a lot of the projects. But the actual directing.
He's got a live band too, doesn't he? Doesn't he sing and perform in a band?
I mean, I'm going off the Postman, but
if I not to always come back to him, but I learned a lot from him when I work, which is John Leguizamo. Like John actually said, and I wonder, I have no idea if this is Costner's thing or not, but like when I asked John, right as we were finishing up Critical Thinking, I was like, oh, like so what's next on the docket? And he was like, oh, well, I've got this and this, and I was like, no, not acting, like to direct. And he was like, oh, he's like, I don't know. We'll see what comes along. And like, but he said, he goes, I'm not dying to direct.
Okay.
And he was like, and he goes, and I was like, real? I said, you realize like, I think this film's going to kind of make a big splash. And like, if you want to start directing, this will be the way you do it. Like you just let your people, like you've already got people, just let them know, like, I want to direct now. And he goes, yeah, but the problem is he's like, as soon as you say yes to directing a film, like that's the next like 3 years of your life. And he goes, and like, I'm an actor, like I want to act. I don't want to stop acting. And he goes, but like, I wouldn't be able to take anything like serious. And he's like, he goes, it's just so much work for what he's like, personally, like the payoff, it's like, it doesn't kind of balance out for me. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, right. If you're a young up and comer writer director, it's like the goal is just to make the next movie. But I get it. It's like depending. And I wonder if Costner is in a similar thing where he's just like, I just don't want to take 3 years to like go through from getting a script written to all the way through the end of like press. It's like, yeah, it's about 3 years. So.
And Open Range was so low budget that it made some money and got him out of director's jail. You're surprised that he never went back, but I don't know. I'm honestly movie I'm thinking about that we didn't mention is it's such a small part is Molly's Game, where he gets to work with Aaron Sorkin and Jessica Chastain.
And I mean, I love that film.
Especially his appearance at the end, where like how he comes in.
Yeah, he's so and like that's the sort of stuff where I'm like, oh man, I could watch Costner show up and do this sort of stuff all day because he like.
Right.
I mean, we will not get into this, but I even liked him in Man of Steel. Like,
oh no, I had to say
he's good enough.
He's perfect casting for Paul Kent. Glenn Ford, Kevin Costner. I mean, that's just you can't get any better than that for Paul Kent to represent the father.
Pa Kent, not Paul.
Paul Kent.
You're saying Paul?
Pa.
Right. Pa. Right. I mean, I was very like, I really liked him in that role. I was like, he brings just the right amount of like gravitas and wisdom and like,
Oh, wait till you see him and don't let him go because it's Maul and Paul Kent again.
Okay.
Because Diane,
right.
They're a married couple.
It's on HBO Max too.
The
right
chemistry's
now.
Great.
Can we go back to one specific thing about Open Range that I've been dying to talk
about? Sure.
It? All right, the closing shootout, right? So we already kind of talked about it.
This was one of the big reasons we going back to Old Henry too.
Well, yeah, and I don't mind saying, and I want to be I'll just say it. I won't preface. So we talked about how, again, if you haven't seen Open Range at this point, sorry that this is a spoiler, but like we talked about how like the beginning of that gunfight is so iconic because he just like walks up and just shoots the guy in the head, no ceremony, no warning, there's no honor in it, he just murders him, and to get him to stop
the line that leads up to it is like it's a really short terse line, but it like defines why, because he's like and he's to the point. He's like, you're the guy that killed our friend, so you have the motive right there, right. And the audience is with him when he does it. It's just like it's such a
because remember then the guy goes, yeah, and I shot the boy too, like
yeah.
And so of course it's justified within that setting
in movie morality.
Okay, but then from the second that happens, then the shooting starts, right? I'm sure you saw this, but Kevin Costner proceeds to fire 13 shots from the one gun that he has pulled out of his holster.
I didn't count, but it did seem like a
And now
this is a Western thing, though, isn't it? If it's just like stop counting bullets after a certain point.
But this is actually something like okay, so this is where like my nerdiness kind of comes into what I do, where like, so when
Okay.
Potsy told me like, oh, really, really watch Open Range, because when we do the final fight scene, like we're really kind of basing the feel and the pacing on that. And I was like, okay, cool, cool. So for weeks I was like watching it, rewatching it, and even going slow. And I even brought it into Premiere and like just to see like
Oh,
how are they cutting it.
wow.
And that's how I discovered. I was like, wait a second here, like that, like the way, if you're listening, and I confirmed it on this rewatch. Like I was like, I want to make sure I'm really right about this. It's 13 shots, and you see many of them, but there's even a bunch of off screen. And the way you know that is if you're really like, I was watching it with headphones. There's a very distinctive sound to his gun.
Did you have your waveform
No,
activated
no,
for
I
it?
didn't. I didn't go that far,
Okay.
but because Duvall actually says he carries like, and the only reason I know this stuff is because I had to actually like pull sound effects for Old Henry. So like Duvall's carrying this old like Colt Navy, which is like a big. He even talks about it in the movie. It's a big, heavy gun. It was a large weapon and like had a very. It was like sounded like a cannon. And Costner's, I don't know specifically what the model is, but it's a much lighter six shooter. And so, the sound team rightfully like really discerns between the sound of Costner's gun versus the sound of Duvall's gun.
Okay.
And
So there's no differentiate, or there's no mistaking the
that's
two.
right. Like you always like, and that's something sound people do, and rightfully so. It's like you don't want to
Right.
be confused. Like who's shooting? It's like if you're it, even if you even if the audience isn't like actively IDing those things, it does seep in your head, and you are aware of like the difference. So it's very clear. It's very clear that Costner's and also just because like he just never draws his second sidearm until later, and he certainly
All right.
doesn't.
I did. That I did pick up on.
So I said, so when I watch this stuff, I remember writing back to Potsy or like texting him, being like, okay, like I've watched it, it's great. I totally see like what you're going for and like what like they hadn't even shot it yet, but I was like, just promise me. I was like, please do me one favor because it's just a thing that drives me insane when I watch movies, is we call it the magic gun, right? And it's like the magic gun that never runs out of bullets. And in the 80s, it
Hmm.
was a big thing. They just didn't care. Like, Schwarzenegger and Stallone, it's like they just never reloaded their weapons. And you're just like, well, I guess they just keep firing. And like, but, and he was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. He goes, that's the one part we're not going to do. He goes, we actually like our armorer and Tim have actually been like working through this of like where he will reload during this whole
Okay.
sequence because we don't want to do that. We really want to be like accurate. And he's like, and a big part of what I'm trying to do is show, not to give anything away, but the idea of how many bullets do you have left comes very much into play at the very end of Old Henry.
Hmm.
And he's like, so we really like, we can't get it wrong before, since we're going to make such a point of it at the very end. I was so curious about this on Open Range, just to keep it with Open Range, that I just started Googling everything I could about like, Open Range, final shootout, number of shots, and all this stuff. And I found a thing where Costner full out admitted, he was like, "Oh, that was totally on purpose." Like, he goes, and I have no idea why he didn't say why this was, but apparently he actually said like, I'd always wanted to do a movie where I fire. He's like, I fired guns in lots of movies, but he's like, I've always wanted to do a movie where like I just fire, where the gun just like fires more bullets than is humanly possible. Why he'd want to do that, I have no idea. But he explicitly said like it's absolutely on purpose. And now, here's what I would say
Okay.
as an
Okay.
editor who's worked on a few movies.
It's a choice.
Well, or was it? Or
A
is
defense
that the
of a.
one way he can kind of defend a really glaring like continuity issue like after the fact by just being like, "Yeah, I wanted to do that. It's a little gag, it's like a nod." So like, listen, I'll take him at his word, but it's the only place in the movie where they do something that just like kind of doesn't fit with like the grittiness and the reality of this world they built.
Mhm.
And certainly I know like, well, any good editor, and I'm not familiar with the people that cut this film, but they were not like first timers. like any good editor is going to be the first one to raise their hand and be like, Kevin, like this is a problem. Like we can't do this. Like you've got a 6-shooter. There's like lots of shots. So that's
the number of bullets is in its name.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. Like, so I realized like maybe you just have to believe him. But in Old Henry, like I said, that was a thing, thankfully, that was well thought about on set. And when I just finally got to see it like on the big screen with the full mix and everything this past Friday, I was like, man, you really feel that. Like you really feel that, like, if you don't have bullets on you and if you aren't pretty quick reloading a 6-shooter, like you're dead. Like you're just dead because like, and if you run out of bullets at the wrong moment, you are also dead.
I feel like the only time anyone cinematically gets the number of bullets right in the reload is if anyone has a musket and it has to take a minute to reload. It's the only time they get it right.
Let me ask you about, you said that, he told you to watch Open Range. I thought this is interesting. I've always heard, especially with Scorsese, he'll have the cast and the crew watch movies, certain,
Yeah.
that he and I now I'm hearing that a lot of directors do that, and they obviously makes sense for the cinematographer and the actors, but so the editors do that too. Are there directors? Are it sounded like you did this? You were watching some on your own.
Yeah.
But how many times does that happen with directors telling editors to watch certain films? You think on the average?
In my experience, it's maybe half the time, and if they don't, I ask. And what I've found is that when I ask, the response is usually like, "Oh, yeah, like yeah, I have reference movies." Like sometimes they're surprised that I want to also watch them. And I'll say, like, if you've got stuff you're watching with your DP, like I would like to see those as well. Because honestly, it's just like I've always been kind of the romance of my job to me is in the craft, right? Like I fully admit, like I'm kind of a nerd about it. Like I love this idea of learning a craft and getting so good at it that it translates into art. And I'm not saying I'm there yet. I'm just saying like that idea is kind of what fuels me. And like the great editors that I like really admire, it's very obvious to me that they have reached that place. I mean, just one of many, many, many examples, but is Thelma Schoonmaker, who's Scorsese's editor. Like, I'm constantly going on and on about her, not because I think she is the world's greatest editor. I think actually she is absolutely one of them, but it's more about like there is almost no other living editor who has cut the breadth of genre that she's done because she's worked with Scorsese, right? Like she's done, I mean, mob pictures, costume dramas, comedies, horror films.
Kundun.
My God. Oh my God. Like silence,
Religious.
like just you name a subgenre of film and Scorsese has worked in it, which means she has cut it. And what's crazy to me about that is most of us working in today's like movie ecosystem, like it's you get pigeonholed really fast. You do 2 horror films and people refer to you as a horror editor, or if you do 2 comedies you become a comedy editor, and it's very hard, and which is crazy because those are just all like middle management execs deciding that for you. And but it does literally happen to all of us. So like in my career I've always been like really careful and thoughtful about what films I do next, because I don't want that to happen, and because I also know that I learn more, and I think my skills grow by doing things that are a little different than the thing I did before, because hopefully I can bring whatever I learned on the last thing and apply it like in a different way to this new project. So uh so you know because of that, like just this idea of craft, just like any other craft, carpentry, sculpture, you know, I don't know, I can't think of anything else, but I always say, it may sound funny, but baking, I think is, or I mean, cooking is like a really good example.
A COVID favorite, yeah.
You know, the more you do it, the more you just instinctively understand the basics. You don't need to know how to chop an onion. You can do it in your sleep. You don't need to know like how to use butter versus oil, because like it becomes kind of in your DNA.
If you get your 10,000 hours, 20,000 hours, even better.
That's exactly right. And I use that example too, but it's like, so I've always been really like focused on this idea of the more I do it, the more those things do actually start to become like unsaid, and I don't need to think about them. And I've noticed that means now I can focus on like slightly higher concept things. And then sometimes those things become ingrained, and now I can focus on even higher concept things. And, you know, so that's part of why I do so much research, to bring it back, I guess, to your question, is like, because I do a lot of research to get a sense of like, all right, like I know how to cut, you know, I can cut this scene and I can make it work and I can make it just go from point A to point B to point C. But like, is there anything I can do to maybe like elevate it? Is there anything I can do using my tool set to make it even like cooler than it was the way they shot it? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. But like, to me, that's where the art of it kind of comes in. And that, my opinion is that like, it does kind of take the, you know, the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing to like, to start to be able to do that. You can get lucky before that, or fortunate. Like you said, sometimes you just get a film that's just shot so well that it cuts itself. And that's great. I love when that happens, but it's not always the case.
Yeah, it's not always the case. Jamie Kirkpatrick, thank you for doing this podcast.
Oh my gosh, it was such a pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on, and thank you so much.
Come back sometime.